Chapter 53. Die without an intact corpse. Every single word was a heart-wrenching one. Not to mention the 5 old men who were doing the autopsy, even Luo Kadi and Ma Liang's faces turned pale. Luo Kadi let out a cold humph. He took a step forward and placed his palm on the hilt of his sword. Ma Liang let out a light humph. He reached out his hand and stopped Luo Kadi. With both hands behind his back, he walked to Lu Xiyun, who was crying his heart out. 6th Young Master Lu, please give me a detailed account of your journey into the mountains. Lu Xiyun sobbed a few times. He raised his tear-stained face and stuttered, Sir Yen Bugue of Scouting Officer has given the order. Anyone who dares to reveal anything about this trip will be killed. His family will be stripped of all titles and official positions, and his whole family will be exiled. Ma Liang opened his mouth, but he was also frightened by Lu Xiyuan's words. Wu Qi nodded his head silently. He was indeed a young master from an aristocratic family. Wu Qi had never taught Lu Xiyuan these words, but he was able to use Yen Bugue's name to scare Ma Liang. He was indeed the 6th young master of the Lu family. Luo Kadi, who was standing at the side, stomped his feet and shouted, "Then, tell us how our mark died." When Lu Xiyun heard Luo Kadi's words, he started crying and banging his head a few times on the ground. Then, he grabbed Luo Kadi's leg with his only arm and wiped his tears and snot onto Luo Kadi's battle robe. While stuttering and coughing, he told Ma Liang everything that he and Wu Qi had discussed before, including how Lu Suifeng died in the forest. Basically, everything he said was the truth. From the beginning to the end, there was nothing suspicious about Lu Suifeng's death. Old Devil and Lord Flame were both killed by barbarian beast warriors. Lu Xiyun could swear to the heavens and the earth. Lu Suifeng was also killed by a poisonous bug. Lu Xiyun dared to swear on the souls of all his ancestors that he was indeed killed by a poisonous bug. After talking for a long time, Ma Liang kept asking Lu Xiyun all kinds of questions. However, Wu Qi's words had gone through a lot of training, so how could he possibly make a mistake? Although Ma Liang was Lord Puyang's #1 strategist, he was still far behind Lu Xiaobai's monstrous intelligence. Lu Xiyuan's answer was flawless, and there was nothing to nitpick. Wu Qi had even purposely added a few incoherent details into Lu Xiyuan's answer, making it even more obvious that Lu Xiyuan's answer was correct. Ma Liang's heart sank. He really believed what Lu Xiyuan said was true, and Lu Suifeng was indeed killed by the barbarians. Quickly exchanging a glance with Luo Kadi, Ma Liang gritted his teeth and shouted, "How did Lu Zhong die? 6th Young Master Lu, tell me everything in detail. How did Lu Zhong die?" Of course, Lu Xiyuan's answer was impeccable, and it matched perfectly with Wu Qi's answer just now. Ma Liang blinked his eyes and angrily lowered his head, falling into deep thought. Luo Kadi let out a light cough. He freed himself from Lu Xiyuan's arm and said with a cold voice, "So, Mayor Lu, I'm going to say the same thing. Our marquis was protected by 2 embryonic breathing realm Xiantian cultivators. Why did he die in the forest, but you guys are still alive?" When Lu Qingfeng was about to say something, Wu Qi laughed out loud and said, "General Luo, what a funny question. Are you telling me that we were supposed to die in there?" Luo Kadi stared at Wu Qi and said in a cruel tone, "Our marquis is dead, and so are our 2 masters. Why are you still alive?" Luo Kadi moved his skinny body, and a scorching hot aura burst out from his body. Faint light red natural energies were rushing into his body. He was actually a Xiantian warrior, and judging from the aura he was emitting, he had obviously reached the physique-strengthening realm. When the fire elemental energy rushed into his body, his skin and flesh began to emit a light red glow, and the battle robe he was wearing suddenly started to burn. The flame wrapped around Luo Kadi, and soon his battle robe was burnt to a crisp, leaving only the blood-red battle armor. Wu Qi quietly took a few steps back. He waved his hand, and hundreds of city guards raised their 9-bolt crossbows and aimed at Luo Kadi. "Don't be rash, don't be rash." Wu Qi sneered and said, "Even if General Luo is a Xiantian warrior, with so many 9-bolt crossbows shooting at you at such a close distance, you will be turned into a sieve. You don't want to taste it, do you?" Ma Liang let out a light cough. Luo Kadi's body trembled, and the light red flame quickly retracted back into his body. "I'm sorry." Ma Liang cupped his fist at Wu Qi and said, "Old Luo has a bad temper, but he didn't mean any harm. It's just that he couldn't accept the tragic death of the Marquis. Mayor Lu, please allow us to transport the Marquis's coffin out of the city. We will return to the capital city now." Lu Chengfeng nodded and said, "You don't want to rest for the night?" Ma Liang sighed and said, "Since things have come to this, why should we rest? We should hurry up and send the Marquis back." Wu Qi continued to ask, "Marquis is like this, is it your own idea, or is it Lord Puyang's idea?" Wu Qi pointed at Marquis Lu, whose internal organs were all removed. He was a marquis, but he was cut into pieces like this after his death. This was so strange. Ma Liang let out a long sigh and said, "How can we be so bold? It's Marquis who wants to know the exact cause of the Marquis's death." Wu Qi asked again, "Then, are you two going to leave with the Marquis just like this? Do you want Wu Qi to find some skilled craftsmen to stitch up the Marquis's body?" Just when Ma Liang was about to say something, Luo Kadi shouted, "Why are you talking so much nonsense? Someone, put the Marquis into the coffin, we'll leave now." Luo Kadi threw a glance at the 9-bolt crossbows in the hands of the city guards, sneered and said, "I didn't expect Little Meng City to have such good armaments. How could they have so many 9-bolt crossbows?" Wu Qi said with an indifferent tone, "Oh, these 9-bolt crossbows were left behind by the Marquis's personal guards after they were killed. Of course, we can't let them go to waste. Of course, these 9-bolt crossbows belong to the Marquis, but our young master is willing to buy them at a high price." Luo Kadi's expression changed and was about to explode, but Ma Liang laughed and said, "They are just worldly possessions, so what? Forget it, since the Marquis is no longer here. Let's just leave these 9-bolt crossbows in Little Meng City." Sighing, Ma Liang lowered his head and asked Lu Xin, who was kneeling on the ground and crying, "Sixth young Master Lu, we're going back to the capital city now. Do you want to follow us back to Liang?" Lu Xun was startled, then he shook his head and said, "Forget it, I've already sent a message to my family, and they have sent someone to pick me up. I haven't finished my duty as the deputy supervisory officer of the 3 armies. I really don't dare to leave my post." Ma Liang breathed out a long sigh, then he nodded his head and said, "Fine, fine." 5 old men who were in charge of the autopsy quickly threw Lu Suifeng's body into the coffin and quickly closed the lid. Dozens of blood-armored cavalrymen walked over and carried the coffin, which weighed over 2,000 kilograms, and followed Luo Kadi and Ma Liang back to the city gate. Of course, Wu Qi and Lu Chengfeng saw them off. Lu Xun was also crying and shouting Lu Suifeng's name, following behind them. Just when they were walking out of the mayor's mansion, Wu Qi suddenly asked, "But, it's really strange, Marquis Lu should have had an assassin who grew up with him, protecting him. Why didn't he do anything this time?" Luo Kadi and Ma Liang's facial muscles twitched, while Lu Xun explained while sobbing, "When we were on our way to Little Meng City, we had a bet with a few young masters from the Yen family in T-City. His personal assassin was killed in the battle, and the other 2 assassins were severely injured. They were sent back to the capital city to rest." Ma Liang shook his head and sighed. The 2 assassins beside Marquis Lu, if they attacked with all their might, they would have the cultivation level of respiration stage. If they were still here, Marquis Lu wouldn't have died in the woods. This is fate. If not for the confidence that the 2 masters could protect Marquis Lu, how could they let Marquis Lu take up the position without any personal guards? Really? Wu Qi turned his head and gave the surroundings a glance. After that, he unleashed his spiritual sense, covering an area of over 100 feet in circumference. He felt something was not right, but he couldn't find out what exactly was wrong. Luo Kadi kept a straight face and didn't say a word, while Ma Liang was walking slowly with a sad expression on his face, chatting with Wu Qi from time to time. Gradually, Wu Qi found out that Prince Puyang and Princess Inchuan loved Lu Suifeng the most. Although Prince Puyang had a few children, Lu Suifeng was the biological son of Princess Inchuan, the grandson of the current monarch of the Lu Kingdom. Therefore, his status was different from the other children. At such a young age, Lu Suifeng was conferred the title of Marquis. It showed how much the monarch of the Lu Kingdom loved Lu Suifeng, and how much Princess Inchuan loved Lu Suifeng. If not because of Princess Inchuan's love for Lu Suifeng, who insisted on begging her father, how could a young man like him be conferred the title of Marquis? While chatting, Wu Qi and Lu Chengfeng sent Luo Kadi, Ma Liang, and the rest of the men out of Little Meng City. With an expressionless face, Luo Kadi brought his warriors and walked back to the main group, ignoring Wu Qi and Lu Chengfeng. On the other side, Ma Liang politely and humbly bid farewell to Wu Qi and Lu Chengfeng. Then with a bitter smile, he said, "Princess Inchuan really loves the Marquis too much." Letting out a long sigh, Ma Liang turned his mount and left after leaving behind this baffling sentence. Wu Qi's expression changed instantly, and his heart suddenly started pounding violently. With a stern voice, he shouted, "Somebody, shoot them to death." Grabbing the 9-bolt crossbow from a soldier standing next to him, Wu Qi aimed it at Ma Liang's back and pulled the trigger. 9 pure steel bolts were shot out from the ground. Suddenly, an ear-piercing whistling sound was heard coming from underneath the ground. 10 shiny long blades burst out from the ground and thrust out with 3 feet long blades, aiming at the vital parts of Wu Qi and Lu Chengfeng's lower body. The blades were bone-piercing cold, and in a blink of an eye, they had sealed off all possible escape routes for Wu Qi and Lu Chengfeng. Wu Qi grabbed Lu Chengfeng and leaped up into the sky. Suddenly, the air beside him twisted, and 2 vague dark shadows appeared out of nowhere. They spread their arms and leaped towards Wu Qi. When they were still a few feet away from Wu Qi, their bodies had expanded like balloons and exploded. "Follow the Marquis and die together." These were the last words left behind by the 2 dark shadows. Poisonous gas, poisonous blood, poisonous meat and bones were flying all over the sky, all of them shooting towards Wu Qi and Lu Chengfeng in a messy manner. Ma Liang, who had just walked a few hundred feet away, swept away the 9 heavy crossbows with a backhand. Staring at Little Meng City, he shouted out with a stern voice, "Princess Inchuan has given the order, break into Little Meng City, and leave no one alive. Die together with the Marquis." Chapter 54. In the Liangqiu prefecture of the Lu Kingdom, Liang City. In the northern part of the city, where the Li River and the Liangqiu Mountain converged, the 5 miles wide Li River had changed from its previous 3,000 miles of turbulent flow to a gentle and elegant state, even carrying a hint of shyness and tenderness of a young girl. The Li River, which had slowed down, had formed a lake with a circumference of 30 miles. Between the mountains and the mountains was an exceptionally fertile land. A castle that was 3 times larger than the city of Liang stood on this piece of land. The city wall of Liang City was 50 feet tall and 35 feet wide, and was entirely built with bluestone strips. The city wall of the castle was 70 feet tall and 45 feet wide, and was built with granite that measured about 10 feet in both width and length. The city wall of the castle was 4 miles in both width and length. Within the castle, there were layers upon layers of mountains, rivers, and gardens, and countless pavilions were hidden in the mist. At the 4 corners of the castle, there were 4 fortresses that measured 1 mile in both width and length, each with 1,200 elite soldiers stationed in each of them. A total of 4,800 elite warriors of the clan were guarding the outer defensive line of the castle, while the city guards of Liang City only numbered 3,000. On top of the 4 city gates of the castle, there was only a square black stone slab that measured 3 feet in both width and length. On top of it, a square character of Luth was written in large seal characters. Apart from that, there were no other signs. This castle was where the main branch of the Lu family of Liang City was located, the core of the Lu family. It was the place where the Lu family of Liang City, the number 1 family in the Lu Kingdom, controlled the entire power of the clan. At noon, under a dense cluster of grape trellises in the northeast corner of the city, 24 serving ladies were standing in a straight line against a parapet wall. They were holding their breaths and staring at the ground 3 inches in front of their feet, not daring to make even the slightest sound. Under the grape trellis, on a warm and sparkling white jade bed, a noblewoman whose complexion was similar to that of a 16-year-old girl, but the corners of her eyes and the tips of her brows were a bit more mature, giving off an extremely dignified and murderous aura. She was currently lazily leaning against a bundle of embroidery, lightly stroking a poisonous snake coiled in front of her. The poisonous snake was 12 feet long and as thick as an adult's arm. Its entire body was covered in blue scales, and there was an extremely thin red line from its lower jaw to its tail. The poisonous snake coiled in front of the lady, flicking its foot-long tongue in and out from time to time, letting out a hissing sound that could make anyone shudder. Those who were familiar with all poisons in the world would recognize that this poisonous snake was a rare mid-tier demonic beast, the blood rainbow blue cloud seed. This kind of snake was born 1 foot long, and it would grow 1 foot every 100 years. Looking at this blue cloud snake's body length, it should have lived for 1100 years. Lan Xiaozi ran like the wind. The blue scales on its body were extremely tough, impervious to all weapons. Its poisonous fangs were sharp enough to pierce through heavy armor, and it could easily kill any martial artist below the breath condensation tier. Under the gentle stroke of the noblewoman, this poisonous and ferocious Lan Xiaozi became as docile as a kitten. It kept flicking its tongue out lazily, and from time to time, it would wiggle its body that was glowing with a bright blue light, gently rubbing against the noblewoman's palm. 4 beautiful maids with stunning figures and temperaments stood by the jade bed, silently serving tea and water to the lady, peeling the skins and seeds of the grapes, and feeding the sweet grape pulp into the lady's mouth. All of a sudden, a series of rapid footsteps was heard. A middle-aged scholar, clad in undergarments and a cloak, came out from behind a cluster of blooming Chinese roses. He strode quickly to the jade bed, grabbed the Lan Xiaozi, and threw it over 70 to 80 feet away, then lay down right next to the noblewoman. His right arm wrapped around the noblewoman's waist, and he massaged her waist and buttocks a few times. The 4 serving ladies bowed deeply and respectfully, then called out softly, "Clan leader." Lu Wenrua, the current clan leader of Lu clan, the husband of Lady Ranyang, and the nominal father of Lu Chengfeng, reached out his hand and patted the chest of one of the serving ladies, then said coolly, "All right, don't be so courteous. Since when have you few little demons ever treated me as the clan leader?" The 4 serving ladies giggled, their cheeks blushing red as they stared at Lu Wenrua with tender eyes. The noblewoman lying on the jade bed, who was also Lu Chengfeng's mother, Lady Ranyang, frowned and scolded impatiently, "A bunch of foxes. Get the hell away from me. Loner." Following Lady Ronyang's shout, the poisonous Lan Xiaozi, which was thrown far away, sprung back with its mouth wide open, ready to pounce on the 4 serving ladies. The faces of the serving ladies instantly turned pale, and they quickly backed off. The Lan Xiaozi proudly straightened half of its body, then began to walk around the jade bed. Lu Wenrua chuckled, then reached out his hand to untie Lady Ronyang's belt. At the same time, he threw his cloak on the ground. Impatiently, he leaped onto Lady Ronyang's body, hugged her, and kissed her fiercely. "My dear wife, why are you still so jealous? Didn't you agree to let me take these girls into my room?" Grabbing Lu Wenrua's ear, Lady Ranyang narrowed her eyes and sneered, "Why are you in such a hurry? Did something good happen to you?" While undressing Lady Ranyang, Lu Wenrua said proudly, "The positions of Liang County, Wenshan County, and Liao County have been taken by a few of my brothers. There are 47 counties in the Lu Kingdom, and currently, there are 12 county governors in the Lu clan. Isn't this enough for you to reward your husband?" Lady Ranyang grabbed Lu Wenrua's ear and twisted it, then sneered and said, "If you want to touch me, you have to make it clear first. Why did the positions of the county governors fall into the hands of your Lu clan so quickly? What did you use to exchange for it?" Impatiently kissing Lady Ronyang's pretty face, Lu Wenrua laughed and said, "What do you mean by Lu clan?" "Madam, it is Lu clan. Now that you are the wife of the Lu clan, aren't you in charge of all the affairs in the clan? Do you really need to know what I used to exchange for it?" Blinking his eyes quickly, Lu Wenrua didn't say anything for a long time. Lady Ranyang let go of Lu Wenrua's ear, then gently patted his cheek. "Chengfen, no matter what, is a piece of flesh that fell from my body. All these years, you know how Chu Hai and the others have treated Chengfen. Chengfen was almost killed a few times, and I don't think I need to tell you who the mastermind was." Letting out a soft sigh, Lady Ranyang straightened her upper body and pushed Lu Wenrua aside. Since you used Qingfen's life to exchange for the positions of the county governors of 3 counties, thence. After a moment of silence, Lady Ranyang breathed out a long sigh and said, "After all, he is my son, the position of the county governor of 3 counties. Using my son's life in exchange for such a great benefit for the Lu clan, how should I, as his mother, feel?" Raising her brows, Lady Ranyang said with an indifferent tone, "Without my permission, no one can touch even a single hair of Qingfen's. Not even Princess Yingchuan, that slut who can sleep with any man, can do it. She promised you the land of 3 counties, but I didn't agree to give her my son's life." Lu Wenruan narrowed his eyes and stared at Lady Ranyang, then said with an indifferent tone, "Yingchuan has mobilized the 1st Heaven Troop of the Yulin Army." Lady Ranyang twitched her lips disdainfully and said, "It's just 6,000 crocatas. If I want to, I can destroy them with a flick of my finger." Lu Wenruan knitted his brows, snorted coldly and said, "All the fishing, salt, and iron in 3 counties will belong to Mark Yuanyang's mansion. Marquis Yuanyang's mansion will own 50% of the gold and iron mines in 3 counties. Marquis Yuanyang's mansion will own 10% of the energy stone mines in 3 counties. Are you satisfied with this, my lady?" Lady Ranyang raised one finger, smiled mischievously like a teenage girl and said, "The general of the 3 counties must be someone who has worked in Mark Yuanyang's mansion for a long time. All the military funds and assets will be given to the general." Lu Wenruan nodded his head helplessly and said, "As you wish, as you wish. You and I are husband and wife, why are you being so calculative?" Lady Ranyang smiled charmingly, reached out her hand and hooked Lu Wenrua's chin, then slid her palm into his clothes. "This is what a good husband should be like. Husband and wife should be husband and wife, but the matters between 2 families should be kept between 2 families. We can't mix them together." Suddenly, 2 drops of tears rolled down from Lady Ronyang's eyes. She said with a low voice, "Poor Qingfen, it has been hard for him all these years." Lu Wenrua's emotions were stirred. He pushed Lady Ranyang down onto the jade bed and was about to thrust his spear into her body. At that moment, when both of them were about to enter the harbor, a young girl dressed in black quickly walked out from behind a vine. Holding a small note in her hand, she quickly came before the jade bed and said with a low voice, "I've just received a letter from the Black Swallow. Yen Buji from Zhuguijing of Great Yen Dynasty fell into the river and drowned. Yen Buji doesn't have any children, but he has 19 illegitimate children. The imperial court of Great Yen Dynasty has ruled that among these 19 illegitimate children, the one who arrives at Ji City first will inherit all the titles, official positions, and fiefs of Zhuguijing." Lu Wenrua laughed and said, "The most absurd and unruly member of the imperial clan of Great Yen Dynasty is finally dead? I wonder which illegitimate child has the fortune." On the other side, Lady Ranyang screamed and kicked Lu Wenrua off the jade bed. She roared with a hoarse voice, "Yen Buji is dead? The one who arrives at Ji City first will inherit all his possessions? Damn it! Damn it! Dispatch all the mountain-crushing cavalry of Lu clan. Spare no cost, save my dear son and return to Ji City at the fastest speed possible." Lu Wenrua leaped up in anger, pointed his finger at Lady Ranyang and roared, "Taiyuwu, are you crazy?" Lady Ranyang leaped 8 feet high and screamed, "Yingchuan, that bitch! How dare she hurt my dear son, Qingfeng? I'll fight her to the death. Why aren't you mobilizing the mountain-crushing cavalry to save Qingfeng? His father, his biological father is Yen Buji." Lu Wenrua felt as if he was struck by a thunderbolt, and his body turned stiff. Yen Buji was the direct descendant of Yen Dan, the founding emperor of Great Yen Dynasty. He was conferred the title of duke and held the position of Zhuguijing. He was responsible for supervising the affairs of 37 vassal kingdoms west of Great Yen Dynasty and could adjudicate all the disputes between all 37 vassal kingdoms west of Great Yen Dynasty. He was also in charge of 2 counties of Great Yen Dynasty and ruled over 10 million people. Lu Qingfeng was the son of Lady Ranyang who had an affair with Yen Buji? Didn't that mean he had the right to fight for the rich inheritance left behind by Yen Buji? Lu Wenrua suddenly leaped up 80 feet high and roared furiously, dispatch all the mountain-crushing cavalry and head to Little Meng City at the fastest speed possible. Whoever dares to hurt a single hair of my son, I'll wipe out his entire family. Even if it's that bitch Ingchuan, Lu Wenrua will rebel." 8,000 mountain-crushing cavalry, the private army of Lu clan of Liang, were dispatched. Under the command of Mark Yuanyang, the blood-draining army, which consisted of 3 armies of heaven, earth, and human, consisting of 18,000 soldiers, followed closely behind the mountain-crushing cavalry and headed to Little Meng City. Chapter 55. Grabbing Lu Qingfeng with one hand, Wu Qi continued leaping into the air, his eyes fixed on the pieces of flesh and bones that were shooting toward him. It was the assassins again, and it was this cruel method of self-mutilation. The 2 assassins who exploded themselves should be the 2 personal guards of Lu Suifeng, who grew up together with him. With Lu Suifeng dead, their lives were meaningless. That was why they attacked Wu Qi and Lu Qingfeng with all their might. Countless poisonous pieces of flesh and bones, as well as black blood with a pungent stench, rushed toward their faces. Unhurriedly, Wu Qi took a deep breath, threw Lu Qingfeng behind him, and slowly pushed his other hand forward. 70% of the innate water energy was gathered in his palm. Suddenly, a sharp whistling sound came from the surrounding air, and an invisible whirlpool formed rapidly. The water elemental energy in the vicinity was sucked into the whirlpool. Gradually, a foggy whirlpool with a circumference of about 10 feet appeared in front of Wu Qi's palm. The pieces of flesh and poisonous blood produced by the explosion of the 2 assassins were sucked into the whirlpool and compressed into a sphere with a diameter of a few feet. The hand of Webb sucked in and then spat out with all its strength. Like a bomb exploding, countless pieces of flesh and poisonous blood shot out with a whistling sound. 10 beams of saber energy shot out from the ground, sealing off all the escape routes of Wu Qi and Lu Qingfeng. The saber energy was cold and sharp, penetrating into Wu Qi's body from afar. Even though the saber energy was still a few feet away from Wu Qi felt pain all over his body. 10 twisted and hazy shadows followed closely behind the saber energy, pouncing toward Wu Qi and Lu Qingfeng. Their cold and emotionless eyes were fixed on Wu Qi, filled with a ruthless determination, as if they would not give up until they achieved their goal. Countless pieces of flesh and bones, as well as poisonous water, came whistling over, shaking off the saber energy and hitting the bodies of the shadows, piercing through their tight-fitting clothes and causing blood to blossom on their bodies. A muffled sound rang out as Wu Qi was thrown more than 200 feet into the air by the powerful force of the 10 saber beams. A huge force entered his body through his palms, causing the meridians in his arms to swell endlessly. Fortunately, his arms were the part of his body that had the most junqi, the toughest meridians, and the strongest power. Although he felt a sharp pain in his arms, he didn't suffer any injury. Instead, his 5 viscera and 6 bowels were shaken by the tremendous force transmitted from his arms, causing him to suffer slight injuries. Wu Qi opened his mouth and spat out a mouthful of blood. The innate water qi quickly flowed into all the meridians in his body through the water meridians, nourishing his injured internal organs. The originally painful internal organs were wrapped by a cooling aura, and the pain quickly disappeared. The insignificant injuries were now under control. The 10 shadows that broke out of the ground with strange escape techniques let out miserable howls. Thick white smoke rose from their bodies, emitting a disgusting smell of bones and flesh melting. They writhed and struggled crazily on the ground, and in just the time of 2 to 3 breaths, they were killed by the poison. Wu Qi fell heavily onto the ground. The shock to his internal organs hadn't fully recovered yet. His legs gave way and he nearly fell to the ground. Zhang Hu quickly held him up and shouted, "Everyone, retreat back to the city. Close all the city gates and defend the city. Those who panic will be killed." With an unsightly expression, Lu Qingfeng quickly led the men and retreated back to Little Meng City, closing the broken city gate. A few pale-faced city guards quickly pulled up the suspension bridge outside the city gate. Amidst the creaking noise, the less than 20 feet long suspension bridge of Little Meng City, which basically had no defense, was slowly being pulled up. Upon receiving the order from Ma Liang, All 6,000 Yulin army soldiers followed Chi-Chi and pulled out a loaded crossbow from a large leather bag hanging beside the crocada's saddle. The shape of this crossbow was exactly the same as a 9-bolts crossbow, but it was 3 times bigger. This was a special 9-cloud piercing crossbow, specially provided by the Lu Kingdom to the elite army of King City. Its power was at least 2 times stronger than the 9-bolts crossbow used by the private army of those influential families. All the cavalrymen of Yulin army raised up the 9-cloud piercing crossbow at the same time. As Ma Liang raised his right arm and swung it down forcefully, all the bolts were pulled at the same time. A huge dark cloud soared up into the sky from the top of these cavalrymen of Yulin army. Over 60,000 pure steel bolts flew up 1,000 feet into the sky, streaked across the distance of 2 miles, and plunged toward the top of Little Meng City's city wall. Over 60,000 pure steel bolts had completely blanketed the city wall in this direction. If there were only 1 or 2 pure steel bolts falling down from the sky, Wu Qi would still have the courage to face them head-on. If there were 7 or 8 bolts, he could easily dodge them. But when tens of thousands of bolts fell down like a dark cloud, Wu Qi was frightened and had his limbs turned to jelly. He quickly screamed and fled toward the bottom of the city wall. Wu Qi, Lu Chengfeng, Zhang Hu, Hu Wei, and those newly recruited hanger-ons of Lu Chengfeng, as long as they had enough cultivation base to react, all of them had jumped down from the city wall, sticking close to the base of the city wall. This was the blind spot of the bolts, and the only safe spot in this part of the city wall. On top of the city wall, the 2,000 city guards of Little Meng City stared blankly at the tens of thousands of bolts falling down from the sky. All of them were struck dumb, and none of them could react in time. Accompanied by the swishing sound of the bolts piercing through the air, the bolts fell at an incredible speed and pierced through the dead bodies of these soldiers. Miserable howls kept ringing out from the city wall. The top of the city wall was filled with over 10,000 bolts, and a huge amount of blood was spraying out from the wounds like a fountain. In just a blink of an eye, the top of the city wall was dyed red. The mud wall quickly absorbed the sticky and boiling blood, and slowly, it turned into a strange color. There were also tens of thousands of bolts shooting into the city, landing in those civilian houses that were close to the city wall. Countless miserable howls were heard coming out from those civilian houses. These bolts were made of pure steel and were extremely heavy. Falling from a height of over 1,000 feet, their kinetic energy was so strong that they could pierce through 2 layers of heavy armor, let alone human bodies. Those civilians who were hit by the heavy bolts were nailed to the ground by the barbed bolts. They could only howl crazily and wait for their death. Crash. 7 to 8 civilian houses had their main load-bearing pillars broken by the heavy bolts, and the 3-storied buildings had collapsed. Dust filled the air, and cries and screams could be heard coming from every corner of Little Meng City. Ma Liang let out a loud shout that contained a powerful innate energy, and it made everyone in Little Meng City hear his order to kill all the civilians. Lu Chengfeng's face turned pale. He clenched his fists tightly and shouted, "Lord Priang, Princess Yingchuan, if Lu Chengfeng doesn't die today, I'll fight you to the last man." Wu Qi continued with a low voice, "You can't die even if you want to, but it's hard to say for the people in Little Meng City. Zhang Hu, Hu Wei, gather all your trusted men. Meng Xiaobai, bring all your uncles from Meng Village here. All of you, gather at the mayor's mansion, and wait for an opportunity to break out." Stamping his feet on the ground, Wu Qi continued cursing, "We're not at the same level as them, so we can only protect the elite men around young master. We have to abandon those city guards. Damn it, I need to lead the city guards alone and fight the Yulin army outside. If the situation goes south, at least give us enough time to retreat." The combat strength of the Yulin army was so strong, and the 9-cloud piercing crossbow had killed over 2,000 city guards with just 1 volley. Wu Qi had no confidence to rely on these city guards, who lacked armor and weapons, to fight the enemies. Left with no other choice, he had to protect the elite men around Lu Chengfeng. He had to sacrifice these city guards, and try his best to create an opportunity for these elite men around Lu Chengfeng to break out of the encirclement. Crocadas not only had a strong combat strength, they could also run at an incredible speed. Without a powerful sniper, Wu Qi, Lu Chengfeng, and the rest of them basically had no chance of escaping. Someone had to sacrifice himself and lead the city guards to fight to the death. Xiaohe jumped out and shouted, "Wu Qi, you protect young master and retreat. Xiaohe, lead the city guards and fight them." With a kick, Wu Qi sent Xiaohe flying aside, sneered and said, "If young master had 100 men of sacrifice, even if you want to hang yourself and jump off a cliff, you can do whatever you want. But now, young master only has 2 or 3 loyal men. Even if you want to die, I don't want you to die." Rolling his eyes, Wu Qi pulled Lu Chengfeng up, brought all the men and rushed to the mayor's mansion. He took out all the gold bricks under Lu Chengfeng's bed and piled them up in front of the mayor's mansion. Quickly, all the city guards in the city gathered on the street. Wu Qi pointed his finger at those gold bricks and shouted, "Brothers, someone is trying to give young master a hard time. Here are 200,000 gold bricks. Kill them all, and the gold will be yours." It was the same old trick of, when a generous reward is offered, there will always be a brave man. But this trick always brought out a powerful effect beyond everyone's expectation. The eyes of all the city guards lit up. They raised their weapons up high, threw their heads back and shouted, "Fight to the death! Fight to the death! Fight to the death!" Over 20,000 men shouted the slogan, "Fight to the death," at the same time. Their war cry soared into the sky and shook the ground of Little Meng City. Outside the city, when Ma Liang and Luo Kadi heard the crazy roars coming from within the city, their faces fell. With such a high morale, it seemed like it would be much more difficult for them to break into Little Meng City. They believed that the force they brought with them was more than enough to wipe out Little Meng City. But if too many of the Yulin army were killed or wounded, how were they going to explain to the people when they returned? After hesitating for a while, Luo Kadi gave out a new order. Over 6,000 crocatas were divided into 4 groups, surrounding Little Meng City from 4 directions. All the 9 cloud-piercing crossbows were reloaded, and the bolts were reloaded. Smoke and dust were rising from all directions. A large convoy was slowly approaching Little Meng City along the main road. Under the urging of Luo Kadi and Ma Liang, over 800 men who escorted the convoy began to unload the goods from the carriages. After a short period of work, they had finally assembled 80 strange-shaped machines. These machines, which looked like coffins and had 4 wheels at the bottom, could be dragged by manpower. They were divided into 4 groups, surrounding Little Meng City from 4 directions. Standing on the roof of the mayor's mansion, Lu Chengfeng's face turned green when he saw these machines. That bitch Princess Yingchuan, in order to avenge her son, she even brought out the Mo machine that was guarding the capital city? Wu Qi found it strange to hear the gentle and elegant Lu Chengfeng scolding the princess of a kingdom as a bitch. But what could make Lu Chengfeng lose his composure like this? What is a Mo machine? Is it very powerful? Wu Qi asked hastily. Chapter 56. With a kick, Lu Chengfeng crushed a stone beast head carved on top of the city wall. With a gloomy face, he began to introduce the origin of a Mo machine. Mo machine was a large-scale serial crossbow manufactured by Mo sect of Great Yen Dynasty. From the outside, Mo machine looked like a coffin, the same size as an ordinary 4-wheeled carriage. However, it was equipped with an ingenious serial crossbow, which was very powerful. In actual combat, MOG could choose to fire a single bolt consecutively, or he could choose to fire 3 bolts, 6 bolts, 9 bolts, 12 bolts, 18 bolts, or a maximum of 108 bolts in unison to launch an attack. MO machine was huge in size, and it was equipped with a large number of bolts. As long as there was a man with a strong arm, he would be able to fire 36 waves of bolts continuously, with each wave containing 108 bolts. When the bolts in MO machine were emptied, he just had to take out the empty box and replace it with a full one, and he would be able to fire again. The time needed to replace the box would not exceed the time needed to drink a cup of tea. Basically, when 2 MO machines were placed in a row, they would be able to fire a continuous barrage of bolts. On top of that, because of the huge size of MO machine, its internal mechanism was a few times stronger than the bowstring of 9 cloud-piercing crossbow. The special armor-piercing bolt shot out by MO machine could pierce through 3 layers of standard heavy armor from a distance of 2 miles. Within a distance of 200 steps, the bolt could pierce through the bodies of 5 heavily armored soldiers in a row. On the battlefield, the MO machine was a killing machine through and through. When 10 MO machines formed a formation, even an army of 100,000 soldiers would not be able to break through. Even with all the resources of the Lu Kingdom, they could only exchange 100 MO machines from their suzerain, the Great Yen Dynasty. All of them were placed in the capital city of the Lu Kingdom, as the last line of defense of the Lu Kingdom. 15 years ago, when the Gao Ling Kingdom, the mortal enemy of the Lu Kingdom, broke through the defensive line at the border of the Lu Kingdom and attacked the capital city of the Lu Kingdom, 50,000 elite cavalrymen were slaughtered by 100 MO machines in just 15 minutes outside the capital city. Now, there were 80 MO machines surrounding Little Meng City. Using 80 MO machines to attack Little Meng City, which only had 8,000 city guards, was like using a butcher's knife to kill an ant. After listening to Lu Qingfeng's words, Wu Qi's face also turned pale. To be able to pierce through 3 layers of heavy armor from a distance of 1 kilometer, this power was simply not any weaker than the heavy sniper rifle in Wu Wang's memory. Even if you were a Xiantian expert, you would only end up with a body full of sieves when faced with the MO machine's continuous shots. 80 MO machines were more than enough to kill all the people in Little Meng City, leaving no survivors. Under Wu Qi's anxious gaze, 80 MO machines, under the guidance of manpower, approached slowly from all 4 sides of the city wall. Outside the city walls in each direction, there were 20 MO machines arranged in a straight line. About 300 feet behind MOG were over 1,000 Crocada's cavalries of Yulin royal guards armed with 9 cloud-piercing crossbows. Gradually, all 80 MO machines were now less than 1,000 feet away from the city wall of Little Meng City. Princess Ing Chuan, Lord Baishua, I'll remember all of you. Both of Wu Qi's hands were trembling, and a few streams of misty water vapor were shooting out from his fingertips. Layers upon layers of water elemental energies were rushing over from all directions, wheeling quickly around Wu Qi, bringing up a large sheet of thin white mist. Young master, can't you deploy a formation to protect the entire Little Meng City? Wu Qi gazed at Lu Qingfeng and asked helplessly. Furiously, Lu Qingfeng glared at Wu Qi and said, "Who do you think I am? The legendary Earth Immortal who has formed the Jin Dan realm? With my cultivation of peak stage Hotian realm a few months ago, driving 3 formation pillars is already my limit." Lu Qingfeng snorted coldly and blushed. He let out a hollow laugh and said, "Of course, even if my cultivation has reached the Jin Dan realm, I still can't deploy a formation that can protect an entire city. As for that kind of profound and magical formation, perhaps someone in Great Yen Dynasty can inherit it? Peak of Hotian realm, driving 3 formation pillars? Was this Lu Qingfeng's limit? Looking at the MO machine outside the city, Wu Qi sighed in his mind. If he had the cultivation of Jin Dan realm now, and could deploy a formation that could cover an area of a few miles, how great would that be? The pitch-black shell of the MO machine, which didn't reflect any light under the sunlight, had given Wu Qi a tremendous pressure. Sighing lightly, Wu Qi took out a storage bag from a secret pocket on his chest and handed it over to Lu Qingfeng. "Take this. There are food, water, medicines, and some gold, silver, and jewelry in it. It's more convenient to bring this with you when you're escaping." Lu Qingfeng snatched the storage bag, then gazed at Wu Qi with a joyful expression and said, "So, it was you who did that. There should be at least a few magical items in it, right? At least, there should be some energy stones, right? Where are they?" Wu Qi tilted his head and stared at the MO machine outside the city. He couldn't be bothered with Lu Qingfeng. He had risked his life to steal 2 storage bags, and it was already very generous of him to give one to Lu Qingfeng. Yet, Lu Qingfeng still wanted the original items in the storage bag? Don't even think about it. Touching the other storage bag on his chest, Wu Qi felt much more relaxed. All the things he had found in Little Meng City were stored in this storage bag. Even if he couldn't defend the city, even if he was forced to flee with these things, he would have the confidence to survive in this world. Xiaohe, Zhang Hu, and Hu Wei were mobilizing the city guards, dividing the areas for each camp according to the neighborhoods. The enemies outside the city were too powerful, and the broken city wall of Little Meng City couldn't be defended any longer. Therefore, they had to rely on the civilian houses within the city to defend themselves. The first thing that all the city guards who were stationed in the civilian houses did was to use all the materials they could find and build a thick and heavy defensive layer on top of their heads. Quilts that were soaked with water, animal skins that were also soaked with water, wooden planks, iron pots, tabletop, cloth bags filled with soil, and so on. All the city guards were moving quickly. Especially those civilian houses with 2 stories and above, they were the favorite of all the soldiers. They hid on the first floor, piling up all kinds of miscellaneous items they could find on the floor, effectively building a strong defensive layer. Except for 5,000 elite city guards, who were fully equipped with armor and weapons, who were stationed in the mayor's mansion, which was built entirely with bricks and stones, the rest of the soldiers were stationed in different civilian houses in Little Meng City. Under the supervision of these soldiers, all the civilians in Little Meng City were ready to fight to the death. Ma Liang's order of killing everyone in the city had been heard clearly by everyone in the city. Since you want to slaughter everyone in the city, don't blame everyone in the city for fighting to the death with you. While the soldiers and civilians in the city were getting ready, the MO machine outside the city was carefully making some adjustments. Accompanied by the sound of grinding gears, the front end of the MO machine was slowly lifted up, forming an angle of 45 degrees from the ground. Wu Qi pulled Lu Qingfeng and jumped off the city tower, bringing a group of men and squeezing into a dark hole on the city wall where the soldiers were hiding. They moved a few green bricks away, and through the observation holes on the city wall, they could clearly see the movement of the enemy outside the city. About half an hour later, all the adjustments of the MO machines were completed. Riding on crocotas, Luo Kadi raised his sword high up into the air and cried out, "Fire at the same time, attack the city. After the city is breached, don't seal off the blades, let the boys do whatever they want." A dead silence reigned in Little Meng City. Suddenly, a few clear and melodious clangs of metal clashing rang out. After that, 108 small openings suddenly appeared on the front end of the MO machines. Wave after wave of bolts shot out like a swarm of crazy hornets, piercing through the air with an ear-splitting swishing noise. Waves of bolts soared high up into the sky. After gliding heavily for some distance, they drew a beautiful arc in the air and fell forcefully onto the ground. The bolts shot out from 4 directions, converged in the sky above Little Meng City, covering the entire city with nearly no blind spots. The bolts fell down like raindrops. Clang, 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 clang. Almost at the same time, the roof tiles of all the houses in Little Meng City exploded. Countless green roof tiles shattered into pieces, and large pieces of bricks and tiles shot up several feet high into the sky. At first glance, all the houses and courtyards in Little Meng City were covered by a layer of green dust. Loud crashing noises kept coming out from the observation holes. Looking out from the observation holes, all the buildings on the eastern side of Little Meng City were collapsing. Through the flying dust, one could see countless figures twisting and twitching amidst the rain of bolts, then falling stiffly to the ground. Wu Qi's eyes turned red. Among those figures, most of them were the people of Little Meng City. He didn't care if those people died, as Wu Qi didn't have any feelings for them. However, there was also a group of city guards among them, and Wu Qi had spent a lot of effort to train them. He had personally supervised their training, lectured them personally, and taught them how to cultivate their inner strength. He had even trained some of the soldiers in combat. Princess Ying Chuan, Lord Baishua. Wu Qi forcefully slammed his palm onto the city wall. Princess Ying Chuan, Lord Baishua, and Lord Priyang. Lu Qingfeng's eyes were filled with blood. Like a mad tiger, he slammed his fist onto the city wall and said, "When I, Lu Qingfeng, have a bright future, I'll definitely fight you to the death." Bang! Wu Qi and Lu Qingfeng unleashed their innate energies. When their energies collided with each other, the impact nearly knocked out all the people in the dark hole. Another wave of bolts, another wave of bolts. The bolts of MO machines were ceaseless, raining down like a violent storm. When all the bolts in the boxes were emptied, those people operating MO machines would immediately reload the boxes, and once again unleash an endless barrage of attacks. Under such a heavy attack, all the people in the city couldn't move at all. They could only watch as the bolts kept raining down, killing and injuring the civilians in the city. Half of the civilian houses in Little Meng City had collapsed under the powerful barrage of bolts. At least 50,000 civilians were killed or wounded. The ground in the city was filled with arrows made from pure steel. At first glance, Little Meng City looked like a field of nettles. After reloading the boxes twice, the crazy barrage of ammo machines finally stopped. Luo Kadi raised his sword high up in the air and cried out, "Attack the city! Kill every single one of them, leave no one alive. Let all the living beings in this city be buried together with the marquis." The crocodiles of Yulin army charged forward while whistling. When they were still a few feet away from the city gate, they threw out several dozens of explosive talismans. The massive explosion had turned all 4 city gates and the 1,000 feet long city wall into ashes. Over 6,000 crocodiles marched straight into the city. The city was breached. Wu Qi mustered up his internal energy and roared out, "Brothers, come out and fight. Avenge our fallen brothers. For each man you kill, you will be rewarded with 100 gold coins. Whoever kills Luo Kadi and Ma Liang, these 2 bitches, will be rewarded with 100 gold coins, 100 beautiful girls, 10 stones of pearls and gemstones, 10 buckets of energy stones, and a Xiantian level cultivation technique." Lu Qingfeng turned to look at Wu Qi in shock. He scolded in a low voice, "I don't have so many treasures that you promised me." Wu Qi didn't pay any attention to Lu Qingfeng. He just kept roaring out again and again. The lifeless Little Meng City suddenly boiled up. Countless figures dashed out from the collapsed buildings, charging toward the Yulin army who had broken into the city from all 4 city gates. Chapter 57. With a flash of blood, a Yulin army soldier riding on a crocotas waved his hand, and 2 rangers who had just crawled out from a pile of bricks and tiles fell to the ground, howling miserably. The long swords sliced through their necks, almost cutting off their heads. Blood sprayed a few feet away, and soon, a puddle of sticky blood had accumulated on the ground. The Yulin army soldier let out a complacent laugh, then spat to the side with a disdainful look. While he was tilting his head, a barbarian hunter hiding under a collapsed canopy, holding a palm-sized crossbow in his hand, let out a hideous smile and shot out a tiny tree spike. The 3-inch-long, hair-thin tree spike shot 20 feet away and hit the exposed neck of the barbarian hunter. The tree spike was dipped in the venom of widow flower spider, a specialty of Meng Mountains. The barbarian hunter's body turned stiff, and after riding on his crocotas for a few hundred feet, he suddenly coughed out a mouthful of black blood and fell to the ground. 100 gold coins in hand. The barbarian hunter who had successfully killed the enemy smacked his lips complacently. Just when he was about to stand up and move to another place for ambush, 3 pure steel bolts came whistling over, piercing through the canopy and piercing into his back, nailing him to the ground. 2 Yulin army soldiers dashed over, thrusting out their lances and piercing through the canopy, tossing the dead body of the barbarian hunter up into the air. The heavy lance struck the dead body of the barbarian hunter a few hundred feet away, and when it landed on the ground, it was broken into 3 parts. Damn bastard! After killing the barbarian hunter, the 2 Yulin army soldiers stared at the dead body of their comrade with flames of fury in their eyes. The 1st Heaven Battalion of Yulin Army, claimed to be the strongest force in the Lu Kingdom, had lost one of their men in a remote place like Little Meng City. If this news spread out, it would be a great disgrace to the entire Yulin Army. While the furious Yulin Army soldiers were about to continue their assault, a dozen city guards suddenly rushed out from a leaning restaurant on the roadside, howling and yelling. They leaped onto the back of crocotas in a frenzy, surrounding the 2 Yulin army soldiers, and began to stab and hack at the 2 Yulin army soldiers. Most of the houses in the city had collapsed, and there were piles of rubble everywhere. Before the 2 Yulin army soldiers could react, they were pushed down to the ground by these crazy city guards. Poor 2 elite Yulin army soldiers, whose cultivation base was over 30 years, were chopped into meat paste by a dozen city guards who were less than 10 years. Having lost their masters, the 2 crocotas went mad. They exerted all their strength and slapped their front claws. Miserable howls rang out. 5 city guards had their chests torn open by the crocatas and died on the spot. The other city guards quickly chopped off the heads of the royal guards and hurriedly fled the scene with 2 heads in their hands. 2 crocatas and of Yulin of crocatas. And crocatas. 2 of them of crocatas arrow of sound of came out from the army. There were figures bathed in blood fighting everywhere, and ear-piercing battle cries could be heard everywhere. The smell of blood was everywhere, and the reflection of swords and sabers could be seen everywhere. Over 100,000 lucky survivors of Little Meng City were fighting fiercely with over 6,000 soldiers of Yulin army who had broken into the city. If it were any other city in the Lu Kingdom, when over 6,000 crocatas broke into the city, what awaited them would be a brutal massacre. The experience of these Yulin army soldiers in the past had given them the same experience. But Little Meng City was different. The people and civilians of Little Meng City did not collapse. Little Meng City was located in the most desolate and remote area of the Lu Kingdom. Relying on Meng Mountains for its development, all the people in this city were desperados. Basically, there was not a single kind-hearted person in this city. Everyone could fight with weapons, and they were all murderers who made their living on the edge of a blade. Even those prostitutes who did business on the streets, when it was convenient for them, didn't mind doing some shady business that involved money and murder. This was a deformed city of violence, a city born from the desire for money. If the soldiers of Yulin army were 6,000 ferocious tigers, then the people and civilians of Little Meng City were hundreds of thousands of hungry wolves, and they were driven into a desperate situation by the order to kill. But everyone, including Luo Kedi and Ma Liang, treated the people of Little Meng City as hundreds of thousands of sheep. Slaughter, endless slaughter. Be it the people or civilians of Little Meng City, men or women, old or young, all of them were holding weapons in their hands, fighting crazily with the soldiers of Yulin army. If they risked their lives to kill one, they would get 100 gold coins, but if they didn't, they would be killed in vain. Right when they entered the city, 300 soldiers of Yulin army were killed. 15 minutes later, another 500 soldiers of Yulin army were killed. Half an hour later, 1,800 soldiers of Yulin army were killed, and there were less than 4,000 soldiers who could still fight. The rain of arrows from Mo machine had killed over 50,000 soldiers and civilians of Little Meng City, and the number of casualties was no less than 50,000. However, after paying the price of over 5,000 soldiers, the remaining 100,000 civilians had killed over 1,800 soldiers of Yulin army, and had taken away a huge chunk of meat from them. Wu Qi slapped his own forehead forcefully and scolded under his breath, "Wu Qi, you pig!" With the incredible intelligence of Lu Xiaobai, she had instantly figured out the cause and effect of the battle. It was true that Yulin army had an overwhelming advantage in overall strength, but Wu Qi had neglected the nature of the people of Little Meng City. They were a group of ferocious and evil thugs, who had taken root among the barbarians. Over 100,000 thugs, not over 100,000 innocent civilians, could they not withstand the attack from several thousand elite soldiers? Furthermore, there were so many rangers, barbarian hunters, and guards of merchant in Little Meng City. When Ma Liang gave out the order to kill everyone in Little Meng City, all the people in Little Meng City had been forced to stand together. Driven by the will to survive, these 6,000 cavalries of Yulin army were nothing to them. Not to mention the ridiculously high reward offered by Wu Qi. The reward for killing a cavalryman of Yulin army was 100 gold coins, which was more than enough to make any ranger or barbarian hunter increase their combat strength by 10 times. Letting out a joyful cry, Wu Qi roared, "Seal the city gate, trap these damn Yulin army. As long as they are trapped in the city, they won't dare to shoot any more arrows. My men, trap them, don't let them leave the city." No one was stupid. After listening to Wu Qi's words, the people of Little Meng City immediately understood that these cavalries of Yulin army were the best hostages. As long as they were trapped in the city, Luo Kedi and Ma Liang would never dare to order Mo machine to continue shooting arrows. Losing over 1,000 crocatas cavalries of Yulin army, they could still find an excuse to get away with it. But If the entire First Heaven Corps of Yulin army was wiped out here, even Princess Yingchuan and Lord Baishuo would not be able to withstand the fury of the monarch of Lu Kingdom. As long as these damn Crocata's cavalries were trapped, Mo Machine would never dare to shoot arrows again. Wu Qi cried out again, "Buy Crocatas at a high price. 200 gold coins for a live Crocata. My men, capture a Crocata alive, 200 gold coins." Lu Qingfeng's eyes lit up. 200 gold coins for a Crocata? This was definitely a good deal. He had begun to imagine the scene where all his personal guards were riding on Crocatas. Outside the city, Luo Kadi and Ma Yang were looking at each other, their bodies trembling violently. The situation had turned out to be out of control. Even if they were to chop off their heads, they would never have thought this would happen. A mere little Meng city had actually trapped the First Heaven Corps of Yulin army. Were they having a nightmare? With his mind completely blank, Luo Kadi raised up his right hand while trembling and cried out, "Under the order of Princess Yingchuan, we are to break into Little Meng City and kill every single living being to be buried with the marquis. All Mo machines, fill the arrow boxes, get ready." Ma Liang kicked Luo Kadi off his mount, then roared with a hoarse voice, "Are you crazy? Our men are still in the city. If they are dead, we will all die." The First Heaven Corps of Yulin army was completely annihilated in Little Meng City. Just like what Wu Qi had expected, Ma Liang and Luo Kadi, including Princess Yingchuan and Lord Baishuo who were behind them, couldn't shoulder this responsibility. Luo Kadi sat on the ground, mumbling to himself, "What should we do? What should we do? We're finished, we're finished. How did this war end up like this?" Ma Liang was badly battered as well, and he had no idea how to deal with this situation. His body was trembling, and he could only stare blankly at Little Meng City, which was now in a complete mess. All of a sudden, the sound of an iron drum was heard coming from afar. After the sound of an iron drum, it was followed by an endless stream of iron drum beats, which sounded like the raging waves of the ocean. Following the sound of the iron drum were countless shrill sounds of bugles. Some were sharp, some were sonorous, some were deep, and some were hoarse, but they all combined into a frightening sound wave that could make one's heart tremble. Together with the deep and furious sound of the iron drum, it ruled over this part of the world. Suddenly, the sky darkened, and a large flock of huge birds flew out from Meng Mountains, hovering above Little Meng City. Over 3,000 huge eagles and eagles were wheeling in the sky, and on the back of these huge birds, there were some short and shriveled bird barbarians. Smoke and dust soared up into the sky, and from every corner of Meng Mountains that surrounded Little Meng City, a large number of barbarians rushed out like a tsunami. From the east, over 10,000 barbarians were driving an endless number of huge beasts and charging towards Little Meng City. In front of these 20,000 barbarians and countless huge beasts, over 30 barbarian beast warriors had their bodies shrouded in a bright flame as they strode in front of the army. From the west, over 10,000 barbarians who looked like ghosts and monsters were charging towards Little Meng City together with a chilly wind. Surrounding these barbarians were countless poisonous bugs, forming a vast ocean. Spiders the size of a water tank, poisonous pythons the size of a bowl, centipedes that were 3 to 5 feet long, and countless ferocious poisonous bugs were rolling and rolling in the ocean of bugs. From the north, over 10,000 barbarian cavalries riding on bison-horned bulls were getting ready to charge. Every single one of these cavalries was equipped with an armor that was exactly the same as the standard armor of the Lu Kingdom. Obviously, these armors and weapons were not made by these barbarians themselves. From the south, a couple dozens of barbarian leaders, who were clad in beast skins and had bird feathers on their heads, were riding on all kinds of low-grade magical items. Leading over 50,000 barbarian warriors, they were striking a few hundred iron drums and blowing a few thousand bugles as they charged towards Little Meng City. Zhang Hu and Hu Wei, the two old men of Little Meng City, let out a miserable cry at the same time, "Oh heavens, this is a barbarian tide. And it is scarier than any barbarian tide." Lu Qingfeng's face turned pale. When it rains, it pours. Little Meng City is facing a great calamity. Meanwhile, Wu Qi suddenly let out a loud laugh and said, This is great. Luckily, Luo Kadi and his men are here to stop them. Raising his voice, Wu Qi shouted, "By the order of the mayor, open the city gate, and ask the Yulin army to get the hell out of Little Meng City." Lu Chengfeng, Zhang Hu, and Hu Wei were startled, then their faces suddenly turned red. There were still 80 MO machines outside. What was there to be afraid of? Chapter 58. Cheap blood sprayed onto the ground, forming a small spring, and then forming a pool of blood with a circumference of a few miles. The curtain of arrows rose again. 10 MO machines fired all the arrows in their quiver at the fastest speed possible. When all 20 MO machines in the north of the city had shot out all the arrows in their boxes, only 800 barbarians were left from over 10,000 barbarians. The overly dense charging formation and the overly close distance had allowed MO machines to unleash their most lethal force. The ground was filled with corpses and blood. Those barbarians who were lucky enough to survive the rain of arrows were driving their mounts and charging forward in a daze. Their dull eyes could no longer see their enemies. In the face of the frightening destructive force of MO machines, the over 10,000 barbarian cavalries charging in the north of the city had become the weakest link in this barbarian tide. In just the time to finish a pot of tea, over 10,000 barbarian cavalries were severely wounded by MO machines, and the rest of them were killed by Yulin army. Dust and smoke rose into the sky, and the clattering of hooves sounded like thunder. The remaining 4,000 Crocata's cavalries of Yulin army rushed out from the north gate of Little Meng City in a panic. By letting the cavalries of Yulin army deal with the barbarian cavalries, Wu Qi had purposely driven them out from the north gate. This was a wicked idea that originated from Lu Xiaobai in Wu Qi's soul. A clash of cavalries in the era of cold weapons. This was going to be a great battle that was pleasing to the eyes. But he never knew that the barbarian tide, which even the king of Lu dynasty treated as a joke, would bring him such despair when he witnessed it with his own eyes. Before Luo Kadi gave the order, when the barbarians had just appeared, those soldiers who were controlling MO machines had already begun to turn them around. Accompanied by the sound of grinding gears, the heads of MO machines slowly lowered down, gradually reaching a horizontal position with the ground. Without needing Luo Kadi to say anything, the sound of a ratchet turning came out from all 80 MO machines at the same time, as powerful crossbow strings were loaded and shot out. Luo Kadi. Seeing that the countless barbarians were less than a mile away from him, yet Luo Kadi was still standing there in a daze, my Liang shouted out hastily. Driven by a strange sense of schadenfreude, the efficiency of the soldiers and civilians in the city was greatly increased. In just a short period of time, the wall that had been blasted open was completely blocked, and the height of the padding was more than 10 feet higher than the walls on both sides. The cavalries of barbarians were getting closer and closer to Little Meng City. The barbarian soldiers from the other three directions were also being led by the leaders of different tribes and were rushing toward Little Meng City, leaving a trail of dust behind them. Without any communication or preparation, the barbarian army launched a brazen attack when they were within a certain distance from them. In the east of the city, MO machines shot out a whistling rain of arrows, shooting across the sky like a dark curtain of arrows. Wherever the arrows passed, streams of blood would spurt out hundreds of feet away. 3 barbarian beast warriors didn't manage to dodge in time, and their bodies were pierced through by the arrows. A large amount of blood mist sprayed out from their bodies. Their waists were broken by the arrows, and their upper bodies were sent flying back by the powerful force of the arrows. However, their lower bodies were still able to dash forward for over 100 feet. Luo Kadi immediately recovered from his shock. He circulated his innate energy and shouted out loud, "All MO machines, aim at these barbarians, kill them all." Those barbarians who had controlled the poisonous bugs to attack the city from the west of the city let out a complacent and hideous laugh. Together with a chilly breeze and some strange whistles, they strode toward Little Meng City. Their whistles drove the poisonous bugs to attack Little Meng City, and very soon, they had arrived in front of the city wall. MO machines had also shot out a destructive rain of arrows, killing a huge number of poisonous bugs. Poisonous pythons as thick as a bowl, spiders the size of a water tank, centipedes a few feet long, scorpions the size of a millstone. All these huge poisonous bugs couldn't withstand the arrows of MO machines, and were all killed in just a blink of an eye. He had heard about the barbarian tide before. Basically, every 2 to 3 years, Little Meng City would be besieged by an army of barbarians. Using a huge amount of poisonous bugs and wild beasts, as well as all kinds of strange forces, these barbarians would charge forward like a tidal wave. Each time, they would cause Little Meng City severe casualties. This was the so-called barbarian tide. Tens of thousands of barbarian cavalries in the north smashed the head of their flat-horned bison, then increased their speed and charged forward. The dark rain of arrows shot out horizontally across the ground. 10 of the 20 MO machines in the north of the city had arrived at the junction of the north and west city walls. Looking at the fearsome poisonous bugs, 10 MO machines quickly stopped and dared not move forward. Tens of thousands of venomous barbarians who had controlled the poisonous bugs to attack the city had entered the shooting range of these 10 MO machines. Facing the rain of arrows, these dozens of beast warriors had no choice but to dodge to the left and right, unable to move forward. Even though they had the powerful strength from beast souls, even though their offensive strength was no weaker than a warrior of Xiantian realm, when facing MO machines, these killing machines on the battlefield, they had no choice but to throw their heads back and roar angrily. The knight had regained his composure. They were not the imperial envoys who had been ordered to investigate a case. No matter who was the one who had colluded with the barbarians, they had to get through this crisis first. However, when he turned his head around, he saw the soldiers and civilians of Little Meng City were moving a great amount of bricks and stones, as well as a great amount of beams and pillars, filling up the gap on the city wall that he had ordered to blast out. More than half of the civilian houses in the city had collapsed due to the rain of arrows, and there were a great amount of broken buildings near the city gate, which could be used to fill up the city wall. The dozens of barbarian beast warriors from the east of the city had arrived at a place less than half a mile away from MO machines. Behind them, there were all kinds of strange and ferocious beasts. Tigers, rhinos, orangutans, wild boars, buffaloes, all kinds of wild beasts had their eyes turned red. Panting heavily, they were charging toward Little Meng City with no regard for their lives. Almost instinctively, Luo Kadi turned his mount around and was about to call back his soldiers and charge into Little Meng City. He had no courage to fight a wild battle with these barbarians, who had an absolute advantage over them. His instinct told him that once he had a head-on confrontation with these barbarians, all the soldiers he had brought here would be devoured by them. Suddenly, a dense rain of arrows was shot down from the sky. The bird barbarians, who had been hovering in the sky and watching the battle below, had finally slowly pulled their bows open and launched an attack at the ground. Blood sprayed everywhere. The first wave of arrows had killed over 1,000 barbarian cavalries with ease. Then came the second wave, the third wave, and the fourth wave. 20 MO machines from the north of the city quickly divided into 2 teams, rushing toward the east and west of the city as reinforcements. However, the majority of the poisonous bugs were tens of thousands of normal-sized poisonous bugs. There were poisonous snakes a few feet long and as thick as a thumb, poisonous spiders the size of a thumb to the size of a fist, centipedes a few inches long, and scorpions the size of a palm. There were nearly 500,000 poisonous bugs, covering an area of a few miles. They let out shrill screeches and rushed toward the MO machines. The barbarian beast warriors from the east took a few dozen feet forward with a single step, leading countless ferocious beasts and leaping toward the MO machines at the same speed. The cavalries of Yulin army rushed forward and easily killed these barbarian cavalries who had lost their will to fight. Luo Kadi glared at this cavalries fiercely and cursed furiously, "What does this have to do with us? Form up, let's fight these barbarians to the death." The dozens of barbarian leaders from the south slowly slowed down their speed. Behind them, several tens of thousands of barbarian soldiers were beating the iron drums and blowing the bugles, brushing past these leaders and leaping forward like a group of mad beasts. Hundreds of crude scaling ladders were thrown to the ground by these barbarian soldiers, and were soon trampled into sawdust. The city gate of Little Meng City was wide open, and a large part of the city wall had been blown away. Therefore, scaling ladders were no longer needed. Large groups of wild beasts were letting out miserable cries. They didn't know how to dodge, and only knew how to charge forward crazily. Usually, one arrow would pierce through the bodies of 7 to 8 wild beasts, and only then would it be embedded in the bodies of these wild beasts. The situation in the south of the city was even more miserable. Groups of barbarian soldiers who had been charging forward had fallen to the ground. The MO machines let out joyful whistling noises, unleashing a torrent of arrows that harvested the lives of these barbarian soldiers. From 50 steps in front of the MO machines to 2 miles away, the entire area had turned into a dead zone. Any barbarian soldier who dared to step into this area would be shot to death by the powerful arrows. However, to Wu Qi's disappointment, the cavalries of Yulin army didn't attack the barbarians bravely while shouting their slogans. Instead, they cowardly hid behind the MO machines and formed a thin line of defense. All the cavalries turned their heads and stared at Little Meng City, their eyes filled with fear and panic. The soldiers in the MO machines were bitten to death by the poisonous bugs that had crawled into them. 20 MO machines had become useless. The MO machines, which had the ability to kill large targets, had lost all their power when facing these tiny poisonous bugs. The barbarians' attack had fallen into a stalemate, and only the barbarians at the west of the city had made great progress. Over 1,000 barbarian cavalries and their mounts who were charging at the forefront let out miserable cries at the same time. From a distance of a mile, the heavy crossbows of MO machines had easily pierced through the heavy armors worn by these barbarians, pierced through their bodies, and pierced into the bodies of their companions behind them. More than half of the over 10,000 Gu barbarians had fallen to the ground. The poisonous bugs controlled by them were thrown into chaos and scattered in all directions. Luo Kadi swallowed a mouthful of saliva with great difficulty, looking at the barbarians who had surrounded them from all sides in a panic. The poisonous bugs swarmed over and leaped onto the soldiers who were controlling the MO machines. Miserable cries rang out. Hundreds of soldiers were drowned by the tide of bugs, and very soon, they fell to the ground. The tide of bugs flowed past these soldiers, and very soon, those soldiers who kept twisting and struggling had lost all signs of life. When the tide of bugs was gone, all that was left on the ground was a pile of pitch-black bones. A few cavalries jumped down from their crocodiles and began checking the equipment of these barbarian cavalries. A cavalries quickly brought a helmet and a large sword and came before Luo Kadi. "General, all the armors and weapons are the standard military equipment of the Lu Kingdom." The cavalries had an excited smile on his face. He had long heard that some people were colluding with barbarians and selling military equipment to them. Now that he had found the evidence, it might be a great merit for him. The ones who launched the attack from the west of Little Meng City were the Tsgu barbarians, the scariest tribe in Meng Mountains. They were a group of barbarians who specialized in controlling all kinds of poisonous bugs, and they possessed all kinds of unimaginable and bizarre powers. Countless poisonous bugs crazily charged toward Little Meng City, and like a tidal wave, they charged toward the MO machines that were defending the west side of the city wall. Sharp cries of bugs were heard coming from the west. Countless strange and bizarre bugs sprung up into the sky and swarmed toward the city like a tidal wave. Even Mao Yang, who was usually proud of his intelligence, was struck dumb by this scene. He looked at the city wall that was blocked behind him, then at the barbarians who were charging toward him from the front. He felt a pain in his lower abdomen, and he nearly threw up a stream of liquid. The rain of arrows rained down on the heads of those soldiers who were controlling the MO machines. A large number of soldiers howled and fell to the ground. Chapter 59. Satisfying, this is really satisfying. Standing on top of the city wall, Wu Qi had a shield wrapped in 3 layers of buffalo hide and lined with half-an-inch thick bronze plate on the inside. He was watching the fierce battle outside the city with a smile on his face. Countless prickles fell from the sky like raindrops, clashing against the shield and producing loud cracking noises, yet none of them could hurt even a single strand of his hair. The barbarian tide outside the city was terrifying, but it seemed like the attacking barbarians were not united. Different barbarians from different tribes had different plans in mind. For example, If the bird barbarians above their heads had launched their attack earlier, once the soldiers controlling the MO machines were killed, the barbarians on the ground would not have suffered such a great loss. As for those barbarian beast warriors on the east side of the city, they did not unleash their full strength to attack as well. They were just trying to provoke the firepower of the MO machines. Although a large number of wild beasts were killed or wounded, the barbarians controlling the wild beasts did not suffer any loss. The 3 barbarian beast warriors who were killed should be just an accident. If not for the sudden attack from the 10 MO machines on the north side of the city, how could these goo barbarians who were controlling the poisonous bugs on the west side of the city suffer any loss? All they needed to do was to wait for the poisonous bugs to attack the city, and they did not even need to lift a finger. Among the over 30 barbarian leaders on the south side of the city, a few of them were dancing and jumping with joy. Over 20,000 barbarian soldiers under their command were either killed or wounded. A dozen of them were hesitating, sometimes advancing, sometimes retreating, and they had also lost a small half of their soldiers. There were also 5 barbarian leaders who obviously had the strongest cultivation base, and the magical items they used were the brightest. The over 10,000 soldiers behind them only charged forward for half a mile before quickly retreating. They did not suffer any loss at all. The one who suffered the heaviest loss was the over 10,000 barbarian cavalries on the north side of the city. The barbarian cavalries who were completely wiped out were actually equipped with excellent armors and weapons produced by the Lu Kingdom. On top of that, they were the ones who lost all their men. The mystery behind this was really worth pondering. A few prickles brushed past the edge of the shield and fell to the ground. Wu Qi grabbed a few prickles and threw them out of the city. A few tiny venomous snakes were swimming towards the city wall. The prickles that Wu Qi threw out had pierced into their vital points, firmly nailing them to the ground. Zhang Hu, who also had a shield on his head, led a large group of soldiers carrying barrels of oil and ran up the wall. A large amount of oil was poured down the wall, followed by a dozen torches. Outside the western city wall, a large area of flames burned, and countless poisonous insects were instantly engulfed in the flames. The venomous insects squeaked as they were burned, and a pungent stench rose into the sky along with billowing black smoke, accompanied by the sound of their bodies exploding. More fuel was poured down the wall, and the entire western wall was surrounded by flames. The ground was soaked in oil more than a foot thick. The large amount of fuel ensured that the fire could burn for at least an hour. With this layer of fire, the poisonous insects in the west of the city were no longer a threat. Those goo barbarians who were controlling the poisonous bugs let out a shrill whistle. Immediately, a large swarm of poisonous bugs turned towards the north of the city, crazily rushing towards those 10 MO machines. The soldiers controlling the MO machines let out shrill cries of terror and despair. Quickly, they abandoned the slow-moving MO machines and fled towards the north of the city. Wu Qi hastily rushed to the northwest corner of the city wall. He grabbed a few oil cans and threw them out with all his strength. Intentionally or unintentionally, the oil cans fell to the ground near the MO machines, and a large amount of fuel splashed onto the MO machines. He threw out a few more torches, and all 10 MO machines were set ablaze on the spot. The dense sound of steel wires breaking kept coming out from the pitch-black shells of the machines. These MO machines were the strategic defensive weapons of the Lu Kingdom, and it was impossible for them to fall into the hands of Wu Qi and Lu Chengfeng. Since it was impossible for them to become his, he should destroy them completely. If not for the fact that the 20 MO machines in the west of the city were too far away, Wu Qi wished he could burn them all down. However, what Wu Qi failed to do, those goo barbarians had done it. Having lost the threat of the 10 MO machines that came from the north, those goo barbarians, who were surrounded by chilly winds, rushed over joyfully and dragged the 20 MO machines back. Surprisingly, these goo barbarians stopped attacking the city. Instead, they left behind a large amount of poisonous bugs to keep the defending army of Little Meng City busy, then dragged the MO machines back to the forest. Wu Qi was struck dumb by what he saw. So, these goo barbarians also knew the value of MO machines? Suddenly, the big birds above his head let out a sharp cry. About half of the bird barbarians controlled the birds and quickly chased towards the direction where the goo barbarians retreated. Before Little Meng City was conquered, it seemed like the barbarians had begun to split up. Thousands of thoughts flashed across Wu Qi's mind. He suddenly understood the purpose of this barbarian tide. They had robbed the barbarians of 3 black stone tablets, and the barbarians had formed an army and were here to take revenge on Little Meng City for the 3 black stone tablets. However, this barbarian tide had been used by some barbarians, becoming a tool to weaken the other tribes. From the beginning, these barbarians were not of one mind. Therefore, the barbarian knights in the north of the city had been annihilated, the barbarian soldiers in the south had suffered a great loss, and the barbarians in the west and east of the city had only lost a large number of wild beasts and poisonous bugs. If not because half of these Gu barbarians were killed by the MO machines due to their carelessness, they should be safe. Now, when these bird barbarians saw that the Gu barbarians had gained some benefits, they couldn't wait to fight for the spoils of war. Wu Qi calmed down. This barbarian tide should be easier to overcome than what Zhang Hu and his men had told him. Although these barbarians were all elites, they were just a bunch of elites with ulterior motives. What could they do to Little Meng City? Besides, there was still Luo Kadi and Ma Liang outside the city. Suddenly, a gust of fierce wind came from above. A few bird barbarians on top of the eagles were addicted to killing. They actually let down their mounts and flew towards the top of the city wall. One of the eagles had chosen Wu Qi as its target. Both of its claws grabbed onto the shield above Wu Qi's head. Wu Qi snorted coldly and thrust out his palm. The energy was spinning in his palm, and an invisible whirlpool of air sucked away the airflow underneath the eagle's wings. The eagle suddenly fell down like a heavy rock. 5 bird barbarians, who were laughing evilly on the eagle's back, screamed out in fear. They threw away the bows in their hands and jumped down from the eagle's back. These 5 poor bird barbarians had forgotten that the eagle was 50 feet away from the top of the city wall, and that the wall of Little Meng City was 30 feet away from the top of the city wall. Falling down from 80 feet high, 2 barbarians had their necks broken, and the other 3 had their legs broken. With one swift move, Wu Qi grabbed the eagle's claw, unleashed a bone-piercing cold innate water energy, and sent it into the eagle's body, shattering its internal organs and freezing it into a block of ice. He lifted the eagle up and forcefully smashed it down onto the city wall. 3 bird barbarians who had their legs broken let out a miserable howl, as their bones were broken and tendons torn by the eagle, and they died on the spot. The situation outside the city had turned into a chaotic mess. Under the threat of MO machines, the barbarian soldiers and beast warriors were slowly retreating. The group of beasts that had been charging forward were all slaughtered, and the poisonous insects that had lost control were burnt to a crisp by the fire. Other than the bird barbarian that was still shooting its prickles at the ground, the rest of the barbarians had already retreated to a safe distance. The sound of gears grinding kept ringing out. Suddenly, dozens of tiny holes were opened on the roof of the 30 over MO machines that could still operate. Following a series of twangs of bowstrings, nearly 1,000 crossbows shot up into the sky, reaching a height of over 2,000 feet. The bird barbarians were caught unprepared, and over 300 eagles and eagles were shot down by the crossbows. Their dead bodies fell down from the sky, while the bird barbarians on the backs of the eagles let out a long and miserable howl, then fell onto the ground and turned into a pile of meat paste. It was a complete mess outside Little Meng City. The barbarians were looking at the city from afar. Luo Kadi and Ma Liang had seized the opportunity and gathered all the soldiers who could still fight. Over 30 MO machines had also gathered together, forming a defensive circular formation 2 miles east of the city. With a pale face, Lu Chengfeng climbed up the city wall in a wobbly manner and came next to Wu Qi. Fortunately, during these days, those clan elders have presented me with some special products from Meng Mountains, including a section of earthen wood. I've used it to make 12 formation pillars, and now I've deployed the grand white gold dagger formation near all 4 city gates. Whoever dares to break into the city will die for sure. After breaking through to the respiration tier of Xiantian realm, the amount of energy Lu Chengfeng could use had increased greatly, and the density of his energy had improved as well. That made it easier for him to use the little 25th lamp. Just now, When Wu Qi came to the top of the city wall to watch the battle, he had quickly deployed the formation pillars of the grand white gold dagger formation. In just 1 hour he had successfully deployed 4 grand white gold dagger formations near the city gates. Wu Qi nodded his head happily and said, "We don't have to worry about anything this time." Judging from the looks of Luo Kadi and his men, they didn't bring too many arrows with them. With 4 grand white gold dagger formations, we won't have any problem defending the city. The barbarians kept watching Little Meng City from afar. Suddenly, a barbarian leader, who had a grayish-white flying dagger hovering above his head and was emitting a few feet-long blade beams, was walking slowly towards the city gate where Wu Qi and his men were standing under the protection of a few beast warriors. When he was about 300 feet away from the city, the barbarian leader halted his steps. He stared at Wu Qi and cried out with a loud voice, "Can you make the decision?" Wu Qi gave Lu Chengfeng a look, raised his voice and cried out, "Of course, the mayor is standing right in front of you." The barbarian leader nodded his head and continued to cry out, "You know why we're here. You've stolen the stone tablets of inheritance left behind by our ancestors, and we have to come here. This is the order of the Elder Council of the Brotherhood of Mountains, the strongest clan in Meng Mountains. But we're no match for you. You've killed the knights sent by the Brotherhood of Mountains and all their soldiers. We want to have a talk with you." "What do you want to talk about?" Wu Qi cried out with a stern voice. The barbarian leader cried out, "Tell us where the men who stole the stone tablets of inheritance have gone, and we'll retreat. Otherwise, we'll have to keep attacking you." The barbarian leader threw a fearful glance at Luo Kadi's men, who had formed into a circular formation, then complained loudly, "If not because you suddenly had those powerful bolts, we would have definitely attacked your city. But, now that you have reinforcements, all the soldiers of the Brotherhood of Mountains have been wiped out. You can't blame us for this failure. Tell us where the stone tablets of inheritance have been sent to, and we'll retreat immediately. We won't make things difficult for Little Meng City anymore." Wu Qi pondered for a brief moment, then he turned to look at Lu Chengfeng. While both men were exchanging glances, suddenly, from the only main street that connected Little Meng City to the outside world, a dense, muffled, thunderous clatter of hooves was heard. The ground was shaking, and dust was stirred up in the distance. About 10 minutes later, a team of cavalrymen, clad in heavy greenish-gray armor and riding on huge strange beasts with 2 horns, was seen approaching at top speed. Behind this team of cavalrymen was a long army of nearly 20,000 men. At the forefront of this team of cavalrymen was a luxurious flying coach, hovering 3 feet above the ground and driven by 3 tricolored deer. A beautiful girl was anxiously poking half of her body out from the window of the coach. Although she was still far away, she had already started calling out loudly, "Chengfeng, my son, don't be afraid. I'm here, and no one can touch even a single hair of yours." Chapter 60. After listening to Tai Yuewu's words for a full 15 minutes, Lu Chengfeng raised his head up and said in an indifferent tone, "After a long period of work, they finally moved away those broken bricks, tiles, beams, and pillars that blocked the city gate, and cleared out 4 paths into the city. A part of the men brought by Tai Yuo followed her into the city, while the rest of the soldiers set up their camps outside the city." Lu Chengfeng rose to his feet and said with a dry and respectful yet emotionless voice, "Mother, please come to the mayor's mansion. If there's anything you want to discuss, let's discuss it in the mayor's mansion. The smell of blood here is too strong, and it will be disrespectful to Mother." The door on the side of the coach was kicked open by someone with brute force. Tai Yuo, who was clad in a luxurious black palace dress, looking proud and beautiful like a fiendish phoenix, held her head high and walked slowly out of the coach with the help of 2 serving ladies. Lan Xiazi, who was covered in blue scales and had a 2-feet-long snake tongue sticking out from his mouth, was following beside Tai Yuo with an air of arrogance, staring at Luo Kadi with his deep and vicious eyes. Tai Yuo waved her hand in a disgusted manner and said, "You can leave now." Lu Chengfeng walked forward slowly without any change in his expression. He knelt down respectfully on the ground that was covered in blood and mud, kowtowed a few times to Tai Yuo and said, "Greetings, Mother. May I know what is the purpose of Mother's visit from afar?" Under the command of Tai Yuo, the mountain-crushing cavalry of Lu family had surrounded the Crocata's cavalry of Yulin army. Little Meng City is my first foundation in the Lu kingdom. Mother, please guard this place well for me, and don't let anyone invade it. Luo Kadi let out a miserable howl, hugging his thigh that was bleeding profusely and shivering violently. Tai Yuowu sat behind the table placed right in the middle of the hall, and slowly told him the identity of Lu Qingfeng's biological father, as well as what had happened recently. After that, Tai Yuowu continued in an indifferent tone, "For your own good, for your mother's sake, and for the sake of your grandfather's family, you have to return to Ji City with the quickest speed, and inherit everything left behind by your father." Wu Qi felt a chill running down his spine. He sized up Tai Yuowu from top to bottom and sighed with emotion in his heart. Tai Yuowu sneered. Suddenly, she pointed her finger at Luo Kadi. Lu Qingfeng, who was sitting on the right side of Tai Yuowu with his head lowered, had a calm expression on his face. Tai Yuowu snorted coldly and said, "Luo Kadi, how dare you?" Luo Kadi's facial expression turned ugly. He gritted his teeth and looked at the huge three-leaved pansy emblem on the chest of the mountain-shattering iron cavalry. He then asked in a cold voice, "Madame Riang, what are you doing? Didn't our princess reach an agreement with your Lu family? If the Crocata's cavalry was a surging flame, then the mountain-crushing cavalry would be a stable mountain. Perhaps it was because the Lu family was wealthier than the royal family of the Lu kingdom, but no matter how Wu Qi looked at them, he felt that the armors and weapons of these 8,000 mountain-crushing cavalrymen were much better than those of the Crocata's cavalry of the Yulin royal guards. Tai Yuowu had a bright smile on her face, but in her heart, she was shocked to the extreme. Without the help of his clan, without taking any miraculous pills, and without the personal guidance of a Xiantian realm expert, how did Lu Qingfeng manage to break through into the Xiantian realm? And how did he manage to keep a Xiantian expert by his side? This was simply impossible. Lan Xiazi, who was coiled behind Tai Yuowu, let out a sharp hiss. With lightning speed, she leaped out and bit Luo Kadi's thigh. Luo Kadi let out a miserable howl, and his body suddenly fell to the ground. Ma Liang moved like lightning. He pulled out a dagger and swung it forcefully, slicing off 1 kilogram of flesh from Luo Kadi's thigh, cutting off all the flesh near the bite wound of Lan Xiazi. Tai Yuowu immediately turned to look at Lu Qingfeng with astonishment, then she glared fiercely at Wu Qi. Her pretty face was like a blooming flower in spring. She had a very charming smile on her face as she said, "Io, my dear son, you actually have the cultivation base of Xiantian realm? And how should I address you, little brother? To be able to reach Xiantian realm at such a young age, what a rare feat." Wu Qi looked curiously at the mountain-crushing cavalry. Their mount seemed to be a hybrid between a cow and a horse. They had the head of a cow and the body of a horse, and had a sturdy build. There were 2 sharp horns protruding from the top of their heads, and when they were clad in heavy greenish-gray armor, they gave off the impression of a small moving mountain. The mountain-crushing cavalry's cavalrymen were also burly men with exceptionally sturdy builds. They were clad in fully enclosed heavy armor, and each of them held a short mace in their hands. They looked mighty and heavy, and looked extremely intimidating. When Lu Qingfeng saw Tai Yuowu rushing over with the Lu clan's mountain-crushing cavalry, he couldn't help but widen his eyes. Hastily, he pulled the baffled Wu Qi along with a group of hangers-on and selected 3,000 fully armored city guards. Then, they moved away the blockage on the city wall and lined up to greet the mountain-crushing cavalry. The mountain-crushing cavalry opened up a path. Ma Liang hastily bandaged Luo Kadi's wound, then he bowed respectfully at Tai Yuowu. After that, he hastily led the remaining subordinates and left the encirclement. Over 30 MO machines were left on the same spot, and Ma Liang didn't ask anyone to take them away. The Crocata's cavalry of Yulin army left quickly. Tai Yuowu breathed out a faint sigh, then slowly turned around. Her pretty face, which looked like a 16-year-old beauty, was covered with sparkling and translucent tears. From afar, she spread her arms towards Lu Qingfeng and cried out with a sorrowful voice, "Qingfeng, my dear son, I'm late. Did you suffer any grievances?" A whistling of swords rang out, as 4 6-feet-long sword beams glinting with a bright green gleam shot out and circled around over 30 MO machines in a blink of an eye. The sword beams pierced into the MO machines from somewhere, accurately killing the soldiers who were controlling the MO machines. Muffled and miserable cries were heard coming out from the MO machines. In just a blink of an eye, over 30 MO machines had lost their threat. Is that so? Then, can I travel through the night to G-City? Muffled footsteps were heard coming slowly. The heaven, earth, and human armies of blood-draining army had dismounted from their horses a few miles away, lining up in an orderly formation and slowly pressing towards Little Meng City. When they were about 2 miles away from Little Meng City, the 3 armies split up. The heaven and earth armies guarded the north, northwest, south, and southwest sides of Little Meng City, while the human army kept pressing towards Little Meng City. A whistle rang out, and the barbarian army quickly retreated into the woods, especially those bird barbarians, as they ran faster than anyone else. A great amount of feathers came raining down from the sky, and together with the shrill cries of birds, these bird barbarians transformed into a dark cloud and flew away. Tai Yuewu nodded her head slowly. With the help of her serving lady, she returned to the flying coach. Almost instinctively, Luo Kadi raised his right hand up high. Muffled grinding noises of gears were heard coming out from all 30 MO machines. Slowly, they adjusted their angles and locked onto the soldiers of blood-draining army, who were slowly approaching from 2 miles away. When everything had settled down, the night had enveloped the sky. Cries could be heard everywhere in Little Meng City. Those soldiers and civilians who had survived the rain of arrows during the day were working hard with torches, rescuing the wounded and dying from the collapsed houses, and cleaning up those corpses that were shot to death. Tai Yuewu breathed out a long sigh, threw a glance at Wu Qi and his men, smiled joyfully and said, "Are these the men you recruited after you came here? From the looks of it, it does seem like it." Right after she finished her words, one of the 4 old men who had killed the soldiers in the MO machine came up to Tai Yuewu and murmured something in a low voice. With a light snort, a few figures dashed out from the mountain-shattering cavalry. Wu Qi had a clear look at them. They were 4 old men who were clad in a long black robe, and the back of the robe was embroidered with a cloud pattern. Judging from the powerful aura emanating from these 4 old men, they should have the cultivation base of Xiantian unity god and above. Even in the Lu family of Liang, there weren't many warriors of Xiantian realm. How did Lu Chengfeng do it? In the mayor's mansion, the atmosphere was extremely weird. With a belly full of evil thoughts, Wu Qi was sizing up Lu Chengfeng from top to bottom, wondering if the irresponsible father of this young man had such an incredible background. The strongest member of the imperial clan of Great Yan Dynasty? The great-grandson of Emperor Yan Dan? The Duke of Great Yan Dynasty? Didn't that mean that Lu Chengfeng had become one of the core and strongest members of the imperial clan of Great Yan Dynasty? Luo Kadi stopped talking and was about to shout out, but Mao Yang quickly stepped forward and bowed deeply at Tai Yuewu. "You're right, madam. General Luo is just taking it for granted. This trip has nothing to do with the princess. I hope madam will be merciful and let us leave." Tai Yuewu sighed lightly, stroked Lu Chengfeng's head tenderly and kindly, and said, "Why are you and my mother so strange? Why can't I come and see you if I have nothing to do? But it makes sense, you've been wronged for the past few years." Looking at the severely wounded Luo Kadi with satisfaction, Tai Yuewu nodded her head slowly and said, "I won't argue with you about what happened this time. Go back and tell your master, Chengfeng is my son. If he wants to beat or scold him, it will be up to me. No one can use that groundless accusation to kill him." 3 deer pulled the flying coach and arrived at the outskirts of Little Meng City. They circled around the city wall and came in front of Luo Kadi and Ma Yang. Looking at the approaching army, the barbarian leader's face fell. A scarlet-red carpet flowed out from the coach like flowing water, stretching out in front of Tai Yuewu and coming in front of Luo Kadi. With a cold face, Tai Yuewu walked slowly on the soft carpet and came in front of Luo Kadi. With the corner of her eyes, she gazed at Luo Kadi and said, "Ridiculous! What right does Princess Yingchuan have to come to an agreement with us, the Lu family?" No matter how he looked at her, Tai Yuewu was Lu Chengfeng's younger sister, or even his niece. She didn't look like his biological mother at all. It could only be said that she had taken good care of herself, and Lu Qingfeng looked too mature and experienced. Wu Qi's heart started pounding violently. He recalled what Lu Qingfeng had told him not long ago, something related to the cultivation sects of Great Yan Dynasty. Luo Kedi glared at her and was about to say something, but Mao Yang quickly pulled him back and came in front of Tai Yuowu. He bowed and bowed, laughed dryly and said, "We dare not, we dare not. How could we go against Madam? Regarding what happened today, we'll just do as Madam says. I hope Madam won't blame us. We've offended you in some way. For the sake of Her Highness and His Majesty, Madam, please let us go." Tai Yuowu tilted her head up proudly and said in an indifferent tone, "How dare you go against me with just these MO machines? Luo Kedi, how dare you?" The blood-draining army was the strongest army in the border army of the Lu Kingdom. All the soldiers were elites who had gone through hundreds of battles. As the human army approached slowly, an intense murderous aura soared into the sky. Compared to them, the Yulin army, who lived a luxurious life in the Lu Kingdom, was stimulated by the murderous aura and broke out in cold sweat. Chapter 61. On the main road, a line of 12 flying coaches was speeding forward under the protection of several thousand cavalries. This was Lu Qingfeng and his men, who had set out overnight. All the coaches were of the same design, 8 feet wide and 50 feet long. The decorations on the coaches were luxurious and low profile, with a pale golden emblem of a 3-leaved pansy, indicating the identity of the number 1 family of the Lu Kingdom. Underneath the coaches, a formation inlaid with pale green energy stones was glowing brightly, and an invisible airflow was pushing the coaches 3 feet above the ground. Occasionally, some leaves would fall from the woods along the road, but when they were a few feet away from the coaches, they would be blown away by an invisible breeze. 8,000 mountain-crushing cavalries, 500 elite cavalries from the 3rd Battalion of Little Meng City Guards, 600 villagers of Meng Village, and the 2,000 hanger-ons that Lu Qingfeng had recruited in Little Meng City during these few days, this silent troop had more than 13,000 men. Half of the waning moon was hanging high in the sky, and the wind was very strong. Dark clouds would pass by the face of the moon from time to time, and the woods would be dark and bright at times, filling the air with a strange atmosphere. Dense dark fog kept gushing out from the woods on both sides of the road, but it was torn into pieces by the countless torches in the troop. In the 3rd coach, Wu Qi was sitting cross-legged in the corner of the coach. The innate water serpent pearl was hovering 3 inches in front of his dantian, and a visible silvery green airflow with a pale blue glow was shooting out from the pearl, rushing into Wu Qi's dantian along with the sound of water ripples. Wu Qi's body was covered by a faint layer of water vapor, and a powerful internal energy was rolling around in the coach. Since he had obtained the innate water serpent pearl, Wu Qi had spent 12 hours every day absorbing the enormous energy and life essence from the pearl. Over the past 2 months, his cultivation had attempted to reach the peak of respiration tier of Xiantian realm 8 times. Then he forcibly dispersed his cultivation base 8 times, and merged all the innate water energy he had cultivated into his meridians. His meridians had become tougher and stronger, and the innate water energy in his meridians had condensed into a sticky paste. When the innate water energy circulated in his meridians, even Wu Qi himself could hear the sound of a rushing waterfall. The scroll of stealing was broad and profound, mysterious and unfathomable. Although Wu Qi was still in the respiration tier of Xiantian realm, his innate energy had already reached the level of breath-condensing tier of Xiantian realm. Swallowing and spitting, Wu Qi once again absorbed a large amount of energy essence from the serpent pearl. After raising his innate energy to the pinnacle of the respiration tier for the 9th time, Wu Qi stopped his cultivation for the day. Currently, his body was still very fragile, and had not reached the level where he could freely devour the sun and the moon, as described in Scroll of Stealing. Therefore, he could not be too hasty in his daily cultivation, or else it would cause irreversible damage to his corporeal body. Taking a deep breath, Wu Qi placed the serpent core into his storage pouch. Then he jumped out of the curtains and looked outside. Zhao Chenzue, who was riding beside the flying car, immediately came over. "Sir, what's the matter?" He turned his head around and looked at the mountain-breaking cavalry, who were charging forward silently with torches in their hands. Wu Qi lowered his voice and said, "Inform Zhang Hu, Hu Wei, Xiao Bai, and the others. Keep your spirits up, keep your eyes open, and follow closely behind young master's coach. Don't fall behind, and be ready to react at any time." Zhao Chenzue answered with a deep voice. He quickly glanced around with his malicious eyes, slowed down his ride, and spread Wu Qi's words to his men. Lu Qingfeng, who was using the little 25th lamp to craft an array pillar, breathed out a long sigh of relief. He placed the completed array pillar in front of him and looked at it with satisfaction. There were 6 array pillars, glinting faintly with a yellow gleam and shrouded in a faint earth element energy. These were the array pillars of the Earth Spirit Armor Array that Lu Qingfeng had the ability to craft after he stepped into the realm of Xiantian. It was the most basic defensive array of the Earth Element Array. He had the Grand White Gold Dagger Array for offense, and the Earth Spirit Armor Array for defense. With one attacking and the other defending, although Lu Qingfeng only had the cultivation base of Respiration Tier of Xiantian Realm, he could at least handle the joint attack from 2 to 3 warriors of Unity Deity Realm who didn't know anything about arrays. Or put it in another way, he alone could handle the assault from a group of less than 300 elite heavy cavalries. The Tao of Array had always been this magical. Rubbing his palms and shoving the array pillars into the storage pouch, Lu Qingfeng fiddled with the little 25th lamp, then asked thoughtfully, "Wu Qi, if I can inherit the title of nobility and fief left behind by that man, what do you want?" Putting down the window curtain, Wu Qi leaned lazily on a pile of comfortable fur cushions, smiled and said, "Young master is really considerate. Why don't you recommend me to an immortal sect in Great Yan Dynasty? For those who have reached the realm of Xiantian, who doesn't want to take another step forward?" Lu Qingfeng nodded his head, put down the lamp, looked at Wu Qi and said, "All right. All the great noble clans of Great Yan Dynasty will take in some cultivators for their own use. The only person I can rely on and have the aptitude to cultivate is you. With the identity of Zhuguizheng of Great Yan Dynasty, it won't be a problem for me to entrust an immortal sect to cultivate a few trusted cultivators for me." After listening to Lu Qingfeng's words, Wu Qi nodded his head satisfyingly. He pondered for a while, then said, "So, the most important issue for us now is to ensure that young master can inherit everything left behind by Zhuguizheng. What's the arrangement for young master's mother?" Lu Qingfeng let out a mocking laugh, then lay on the soft brocade mattress with all his limbs spread out, without caring about his image. He said with an indifferent tone, "Mein father has personally sent all the assassins of Lu clan to the 9 dynasties to assassinate those nominal brothers of mine, ensuring that I'll be the first one to arrive at G City. My maternal grandfather has also sent all the scouts in his army to cooperate with the assassins of Lu clan." Pointing at his own nose, Lu Qingfeng said leisurely, "Wu Qi, your young master is now the most popular person in the world." Wu Qi nodded his head slowly and said, "If that's the case, we just need to hasten our journey. Besides your mother, maternal grandfather, and the clan leader of Lu clan, who else knows about young master's identity?" Lu Qingfeng said with a cold voice, "Besides you, me, and the 3 of them, no one knows that I'm actually the son of Yen Buji." Wu Qi immediately breathed out a sigh of relief. He counted with his fingers and said, "If that's the case, at least before we enter G City, we won't be in any danger." The large group of men and horses continued their journey at top speed, following the only main road that led from Little Meng City to the outside world. After traveling for over 400 miles in just one night, they had left the mountainous region of Meng Mountains and entered the flatland outside the mountains. When the sky was about to break, following the deep and muffled clatter of hooves, the large group of men and horses rushed out from the mountains. Suddenly, from a patch of barren land by the roadside, a loud and hoarse cry was heard. The cry sounded like the howl of several hundred wild wolves who were forced into a desperate situation. It was sharp and sonorous, filled with a dreadful aura that could make one's hair stand on end. Wu Qi could hear it clearly. Amidst the howl, the clearest voices were the voices of Luo Kadi and Ma Yang. Along with their cries, he could hear the clashing of weapons and the cracking of bodies. Abruptly, Wu Qi pulled back the curtain. In a small depression 1 mile away from the roadside, over 30,000 soldiers were besieging the Crocata's cavalry of Yulin army, who had less than 300 soldiers left. The barren land by the roadside was densely covered with dead bodies. Among them, there were several thousand dead bodies of Yulin army and Crocatas, but most of them were dead barbarians clad in fine armors. Occasionally, there were a few dead bodies clad in light green armors, holding long spears in their hands. In that small depression, a large number of barbarian soldiers clad in the standard armor of Lu Kingdom were fighting fiercely with the Crocata's cavalry led by Luo Kadi and Mal Yang. These barbarian soldiers, whose faces were densely covered with all kinds of embroidery and had a ferocious appearance, were letting out strange cries while waving their weapons and charging forward. Even though Luo Kadi and Mal Yang had inflicted a great number of casualties on them, they still refused to retreat. Behind these barbarian soldiers were over 3,000 cavalrymen, riding on slender green beasts. They were clad in light green armors, holding light green long spears in their hands, and had a 6-feet-long specially made longbow strapped to their back. The Crocata's cavalry howled crazily, their bodies bathed in blood as they fought fiercely with the barbarian soldiers. Each Crocata's cavalry could kill an enemy a few times more than them, but the number of barbarian soldiers here was at least 100 times more than theirs. They were like a small boat floating in the middle of a vast ocean, constantly being slapped by the huge waves. Every time the waves slapped, a few Crocata's cavalry would be torn into pieces by the barbarians. Suddenly, the army halted on the main road. A flying coach stopped right next to Lu Qingfeng's coach. Tai Yuewu lifted up the curtain and gestured at Wu Qi. Wu Qi gave Lu Qingfeng a kick. Only then did Lu Qingfeng crawl up from the ground, poking his head out from the window lazily. For the sake of you, your maternal grandfather has deployed the most elite troop of the Three Mountains province, the Green Wind Cavalry, to cooperate with the soldiers of Brotherhood of Mountains clan to annihilate the Crocata's cavalry. Wu Qi's heart twitched. He turned to look at Lu Qingfeng and Yen. Marquis Yuanyang was the one who colluded with the strongest clan in Meng Mountains in the Lu Kingdom? If that was the case, what was the intention of Tai Yuewu and the others when they sent Lu Qingfeng to Little Meng City? Lu Qingfeng's face twitched as well. But very soon he put on a filial and humble smile. Tai Yuewu yawned lazily and said in a leisurely manner, "This is for your own good. You have to remember what your maternal grandfather has done for you. If you let Luo Kadi and his men return to the capital, with the cunning of Princess Ying Chuan and the others, it is not difficult for them to figure out your identity. Therefore, it is better for them to die here." Lu Qingfeng gazed deeply at Tai Yuewu, then he cried out in a deep voice, "We could have killed them outside of Little Meng City. Why do we have to do it here?" Tai Yuewu twisted her lips and giggled, "My good boy, your mother loves to see the expression of those people when they are feeling proud of themselves, but when they suddenly find themselves in a desperate situation. Look, Luo Kadi and Mal Yang, aren't they very angry and in despair now?" Lu Qingfeng didn't say anything. On the other hand, Wu Qi felt a chill in his heart. The mentality of Tai Yuewu was almost a pervert. He quickly gave Tai Yuewu a glance. This was a woman with a twisted mentality. The troubles that Lu Qingfeng would face in the future would not be limited to what was happening now. She would try her best to control Lu Qingfeng in her hand, and let Lu Qingfeng use the power he possessed in the future to serve the ambition of her and her clan. Perhaps he should find a way to kill Tai Yuewu in advance. However, she was, after all, Lu Qingfeng's mother. As for Lu Qingfeng, no matter what, he was his friend now. Killing his friend's mother for the sake of his friend and his own benefits? Suddenly, Wu Qi's heart felt heavy, and a sense of guilt came over him out of nowhere. Tai Yuewu giggled, then lightly clapped her hands. Led by 4 Xiantian sinecures of Lu family, 1,000 mountain-crushing cavalry launched an assault towards the Crocata's cavalry led by Luo Kadi and Mal Yang. Chapter 62. Luo Kadi and Mal Yang exchanged a glance. The last strand of disloyalty in their hearts had vanished without a trace. Nowadays, the vassal kingdoms of Great Yan Dynasty were in constant disputes, and the territories of these kingdoms were not peaceful either. But, for a direct descendant of a wealthy family to travel with over 4,000 guards and hanger-ons, it was a little too exaggerated. But, if there were several dozens of carriages of gold and jade jewelry accompanying him, it would make sense. The enormous convoy traveled day and night, braving the wind and rain as they headed towards G-City. Wu Qi looked at both men and said in an indifferent tone, "In about 20 days, we will arrive at G-City. Before we arrive at G-City, you will need at least half a month to circulate your energy and restore your cultivation. Today is your last chance. If you don't submit to our young master today, you will be useless in a few days." From the Lu Kingdom to G-City, the capital city of Great Yan Dynasty, they had to cross through 7 vassal kingdoms, namely the Gao Ling Kingdom, Wen Kingdom, Lishan Kingdom, Gao Kingdom, Hu Kingdom, Jilak Kingdom, and the 3 Song Kingdom. Among these 7 kingdoms, the Gao Ling Kingdom and the Lu Kingdom were mortal enemies. Every 3 to 5 years, a big or small war would break out between the 2 kingdoms. As for the other 6 kingdoms, they were either on friendly terms or hostile terms. Ignoring the attitude of both men, Wu Qi told them the background of Lu Qingfeng's birth in full detail. He also told them that Lu Qingfeng had gained an absolute advantage in the struggle to inherit Yan Buji's legacy. If nothing unexpected happened, Lu Qingfeng would become the Duke of Great Yan Dynasty, the supreme member of the imperial clan, the Zhuguezheng of Great Yan Dynasty who possessed a great amount of power. After spending half a year without moving, lying in the carriage like a living dead, Luo Kadi and Ma Liang had been tortured to the point that they would rather be dead than alive. A cultivator who possessed a spirit root and was born with a nascent embryo could break through the embryonic breath tier of Xiantian realm, form the gene Dan, and become an Earthwalker immortal. Luo Kadi had his eyes fixed on Wu Qi as well. He sneered and said, "What if we insist on not submitting to him?" Facing Lu Qingfeng, who was about to inherit all of Yan Buji's legacy, 2 Xiantian warriors seemed to be nothing. Luo Kadi and Ma Liang were shocked when they heard this. They stared at Wu Qi as if they had just seen a ghost, and couldn't react for a while. The title of lady conferred by Great Yan Dynasty was 10,000 times more honorable than the title given to her by the Emperor of Lu Kingdom. ROF City? That was a small city with a population of less than 50,000 in ROF Kingdom. In Great Yan Dynasty, a top-notch madam would have at least several dozens of big cities as her fief. Wu Qi came next to the 2 men and sat down cross-legged. Then, he helped them up and let them lean against the soft cushion. After 7 months of traveling day and night, 7 months of painstaking cultivation, after using innate water energy to strengthen his meridians 108 times in the respiration tier of Xiantian realm, he finally broke through the meridian cultivating tier of Xiantian realm. Although his current meridians were wider and tougher than other cultivators of body strengthening tier of Xiantian realm, it didn't stop him from tempering his meridians once again in the meridian cultivating tier. Sitting with his legs crossed, Wu Qi looked at the 2 men and breathed out a long sigh. Every 7 days, Wu Qi would come over and ask them if they were willing to submit to Lu Qingfeng. But their answer was always the same, cursing and scolding, never showing any respect to Wu Qi. Later on, as their innate energies were sealed for too long, they had no strength left in their bodies, and they were too lazy to scold him. Every time Wu Qi came, they would just snort weakly and ignore Wu Qi. The scroll of stealing was a cultivation technique that was completely different from the orthodox cultivation technique. Gao Ling Kingdom, Wen Kingdom, Lishan Kingdom, and all the other vassal kingdoms were left behind. Apart from being blackmailed by some officials along the way in Gao Ling Kingdom, which cost them quite a sum of money to pay for the journey, when they passed through other vassal kingdoms, they did not encounter any difficulties. The difference between a warrior and a cultivator was like the difference between bronze and gold, or the difference between a mortal and an immortal. Both men were calculating all the possible changes that could happen in the future. However, Wu Qi was not interested in these calculations. He sprung up, and with just a few leaps, he had arrived at a flying coach at the back of the fleet. Wu Qi gave both men an appraising glance for a long while, and finally, a smile emerged on his face. According to the clan rule of Great Yan Dynasty, once Lu Chengfeng inherited Yan Buji's legacy, she would also be conferred a title by Great Yan Dynasty. Although she was already married, it wouldn't stop her from becoming a true top-notch lady of Great Yan Dynasty. Her son was a duke of Great Yan Dynasty, and thus, the title of lady conferred to her would not be any lower than that of a duke. Perhaps, her title would be comparable to that of a king. Wu Qi said straightforwardly, with the current overall strength of our young master, we can't guarantee his future benefits. If both of you are willing to submit to our young master, glory, splendor, wealth, and honor will be yours. If not, I'll cripple your cultivation base right now. Once Lu family replaces the Lu kingdom's royal family, it will be inevitable that your entire clan will be wiped out. These two men were Luo Kedi and Ma Liang. Great Yan Dynasty, the Great Yan Dynasty that was established over 2,000 years ago. Its emperor was called Yan Dan, and it had a group of famous ministers, whose names were Jing Ku, Gao Jianli, and Qin Wuiyang. As a warrior, without any spirit root, his cultivation base was at most embryonic breath tier of Xiantian realm. Even without entering the coach, Wu Qi could sense the wild ambition that was emanating from Tai Yuewu's body. Perhaps, when Lu Chengfeng inherited everything left behind by Yan Buji, the Lu kingdom would have to change its name to Lu Kingdom. 7 months later, when the mounts of the cavalrymen had become much thinner, and the once strong and sturdy mounts had become so skinny that they could be burned as firewood, the company finally left the Three-Song Kingdom and entered the territory of Great Yan Dynasty. From here, there was an official road, passing through 13 provinces and 378 cities. After traveling for over 33,500 miles, they would arrive at the capital city of Great Yan Dynasty, Ji City. If you don't submit, I'll cripple your cultivation base and let you witness how your entire clan is killed with your own eyes. Tai Yuewu lowered her head and squeezed into the coach. Then she let out a joyful laugh and said, Chengfeng, among those competitors of yours, there are only 3 of them left now. All the others have been killed. Now, they are still half a month away from the territory of Great Yan Dynasty. If nothing goes wrong, all the belongings left behind by your father will be yours now. Over 7 months ago, Tai Yuewu had commanded the mountain-shattering cavalry to wipe out their army. 4 Xiantian sinecures from Lu clan had besieged both of them, severely wounded them, and captured them alive. Under the request of Wu Qi, both of them had their Dantian's energies sealed and were confined in the coach. They had been traveling with the company for over 7 months. After a long while, Ma Liang said with a dry voice, since we are going to submit to young Master Lu as our hanger-on, are we really going to meet him like this? Fearing that Lu Chengfeng's identity would be discovered by the people from the vassal kingdoms along the way, after they left the territory of Lu Kingdom and entered the territory of Gao Ling Kingdom, the company that escorted Lu Chengfeng had changed their outfits. The fine armors used by the military were replaced by the armors used by the wealthy commoners, and all the mounts and weapons were changed accordingly. Even the emblem on the 12 flying coaches had been changed to the emblem of a wealthy clan in Lu Kingdom, the clan that specialized in the ironware business, the Tao clan. A few burly men from Meng village who were sitting cross-legged in the corner of the coach smiled and nodded their heads. They rose and walked out from the coach, standing behind the coachman. Wu Qi rose to his feet and glanced at the vast and boundless land around him. Slowly, a stream of water vapor sprayed out from his mouth to a distance of 30 feet. The fist-sized innate water serpent pill rolled up into the air, obediently flying back into his storage bag from his dantian. Suddenly, a melodious cry of an eagle was heard coming from the sky. A small white eagle swooped down from the sky, transformed into a white beam and squeezed into Tai Yuewu's coach. After a while, Tai Yuewu suddenly walked out from the coach with a loud laugh. With just one step, she came up to Lu Chengfeng's coach. After entering the coach, Wu Qi took out a flint and lit up the white candle on the candlestick placed at the corner of the coach. Under the guise of going to Ji City to study, Lu Chengfeng and his company of over 4,000 men were traveling at the fastest speed towards Ji City. Wu Qi stared at Luo Kedi and Ma Liang, who had an unsightly expression on their faces, mockingly and said, "To be honest, 2 Xiantian warriors do not mean much to our young master." You are not cultivators of Xiantian realm. You should know very well the difference between the value of a warrior and a cultivator. Lu Qingfeng's cold voice was heard coming from the coach. He and Tai Yuewu began to calculate how they could smoothly obtain the things left behind by Yan Buji. Although the imperial family court of Great Yan Dynasty had made a decision that the child of Yan Buji who arrived at Ji City first would inherit everything he had, who knew if there were any changes in the decision? To many people in Great Yan Dynasty, the fief of two provinces was a great temptation. Ma Liang fixed his gaze on Wu Qi and said with a deep voice, "No matter what, we are still Xiantian grandmasters." With the speed of the convoy, they would arrive at Ji City in 20 days if they traveled day and night. If not because those wagons loaded with gold and jade jewelry had slowed down the convoy, they could have arrived at their destination a few days earlier. Our young master needs both of you to join him. Sitting on the roof of the flying vehicle, Wu Qi had been holding his breath for 7 months, and his internal organs were burning with anger, while his 7 apertures were about to burst into flames. He stared blankly at the vast flatland that stretched as far as the eyes could see. This was the territory of Great Yan Dynasty, the territory of Great Yan Dynasty built by Crown Prince Dan, Jing Ku, Gao Jianli, Qin Weiyang, and a few other hangers-ons. Wu Qi had no idea if this Crown Prince Dan was the same person he knew, and he had no idea if Jing Ku, Gao Jianli, and Qin Weiyang were the people he had read about in the history books. But the world was so vast, how could there be such a coincidence? Luo Kedi and Ma Liang, who had a messy beard, a haggard face, and a pair of bulging eyes that made them look big and bright, stared fixedly at Wu Qi. Luo Kedi laughed with a hoarse voice and said, "Wu Qi, are you trying to persuade us again? He, we will never betray the Marquis. Even if we have to die, we will never submit to Lu Qingfeng. Asking us to be his hanger-ons? Impossible." Wu Qi shook his head and said, "So what? You have lost too badly, and you have no right to consider the issue a face." Tai Yuewu's laughter was filled with endless complacency. The window of the coach was blocked by a thick blanket, and one couldn't even see their own fingers in the coach. The dim light lit up, and the 2 men lying in the middle of the carriage suddenly grunted softly. Their bodies moved unnaturally a few times, and their eyes were stimulated by the light. They hurriedly blinked their eyes. Wu Qi waved his hand lightly and coughed under his breath. Chapter 63. After traveling for 19 days in the territory of Great Yan Dynasty, Wu Qi and his company finally arrived at Ji City. Ji City was the capital city of Great Yan Dynasty. Over the past 2,000 years, it had gone through 15 times of expansion. During each expansion, the original city wall would be strengthened, and another city wall would be built a few miles away from the original city wall, enclosing a larger area of the city. Therefore, from the outermost city wall to the innermost palace wall, Ji City had a total of 17 layers of high walls. 30 years ago, Ji City had just gone through its latest expansion. The newest layer of city wall measured 180 miles in both width and length. Amidst the thin morning mist, the tall city wall looked like a sleeping dragon, lying quietly on this boundless flatland. Each layer of the city wall was 150 feet tall and 100 feet thick. It was entirely constructed with the extremely sturdy black glowing rock. Between the rocks, a solution of 5 metals was poured, making the city wall even more indestructible. On the surface of this black glowing rock, which was twice as sturdy as a diamond, there were also many runes of earth element engraved on it, constantly extracting the natural energies from the underground energy veins to strengthen the city wall. From time to time, the city wall would emit a pale yellow gleam, making it look very frightening. On top of the city wall, there was an archer tower that stood 1,000 feet tall every 2 miles. The archer tower measured 100 feet in both width and length, and had a total of 9 floors. A great number of MO machines and ballistae were deployed on top of them, giving them a frightening lethality. Inside the city wall, there were countless hiding holes and tunnels. One could even see with naked eyes, peepholes, holes for spears, and holes for arrows. Looking at these pitch-black holes would send a chill down one's spine. As the army approached the city wall of Ji City, Wu Qi could feel his heart beating faster and faster. His blood was rushing and flowing in his veins, making him feel dizzy. Instinctively, he felt that something would happen in this huge capital city, something that would have a great impact on him, or even the entire Great Yan dynasty. Taking a deep breath, Wu Qi pointed his finger at a wooden talisman hanging on his waist. A few simple runes on the wooden talisman flickered with a bright light, and a faintly discernible force spread out from the wooden talisman, covering the ripples of Wu Qi's innate energy. From the looks of it, Wu Qi was just an ordinary martial artist with 30 to 40 years of inner force cultivation. Lu Qingfeng, Luo Kadi, and Ma Liang also injected a stream of innate qi into the wooden talismans hanging on their waists, concealing the aura of their inner energy. The 4 aura concealing talismans were personally made by Lu Qingfeng. They were also the last practical talisman that Lu Qingfeng knew besides the Earth Spirit Armor Array and the Grand White Gold Saber Array. With the help of the chief steward of the Tao clan of the Lu Kingdom, the procession entered Ji City smoothly. The soldiers at the city gate did not even check if there were any contraband items in the convoy, and just let them into the city. Ji City was the heartland of Great Yan Dynasty, and several 100,000 soldiers were stationed here all year round. There were countless personal guards from various prestigious clans living in the city, and no one knew how many experts were hiding in the city. Wu Qi and his company were merely 4,000 guards. For the enormous Ji City, they were like a drop of water thrown into a great lake, unable to stir up any ripples. The enemy did not take them seriously at all. They marched along the main road that was 300 feet wide, passing through 13 layers of city walls. After that, Wu Qi and his company could no longer move forward. As they walked further into the city, the people who lived in the heart of the city were all the nobles of Great Yan Dynasty, who came from the vassal kingdoms under Great Yan Dynasty. A direct descendant of an ordinary wealthy merchant had no right to enter the heart of the city. After a period of bustle, the Lu clan of Liang had bought a large mansion in the city, which could accommodate over 5,000 people. Welcomed by the chief steward of Liang Lu clan in Ji City, the procession was stationed in the mansion. After that, Wu Qi immediately ordered Zhang Hu, Hu Wei, and a few other men to arrange the guards on duty. After hastily taking a bath and changing her clothes, Tai Yuewu immediately sent the chief steward of Lu clan in Ji City, Lu Qiuluo, to lead the way. Together with 3 carts of gold and jade jewelry, they rushed to pay a visit to the current patriarch of Great Yan Dynasty, the Duke of Yanxing Yuxian. The Duke of Yanxing Yuxian was the 392nd grandson of Emperor Yan Dan. He was good at scheming, loved money and women, and valued profit over righteousness. He held the great power of Great Yan Dynasty's imperial family court, and was responsible for supervising the birth, aging, sickness, and death of all the princes and grandsons of Great Yan Dynasty, the punishment and rewards, and the change of titles of nobility. If she wanted Lu Qingfeng to smoothly inherit Yan Buji's title of nobility, fief, and all the official positions, she would have to bribe Yuxian. Wu Qi and his company entered the city early in the morning. It took them a long time to get to the city, and when everyone finally settled down, it was already past noon. When Tai Yuewu took a bath and changed her clothes, checked the 3 carts of gold and jade jewelry, and paid a visit to Yuxian, it was already close to evening. It was an urgent matter, and the longer she delayed, the more variables would appear. Therefore, even though Tai Yuewu knew it was not proper to pay a visit to a Duke of Great Yan Dynasty in such an abrupt manner, she couldn't care less about it. There was no news from Tai Yuewu ever since she left. From evening till the moon hung high up in the sky, Tai Yuewu didn't come back, and neither did she send any guards to inform Wu Qi. Gradually, not only Lu Qingfeng, even Wu Qi began to feel a little anxious. Lu Qingfeng was sitting in the main hall with both hands hidden under the table. His fingers were trembling violently. On the other side, Wu Qi had his hands clasped behind his back, walking slowly in the courtyard like a fish swimming in the water. His footsteps were light, but he didn't stir up any dust or make any noise. Sometimes he would raise his head and look at the sky, and sometimes he would turn his head and look at Lu Qingfeng. His brows were tightly knitted together. After waiting for another hour, Wu Qi also felt something was wrong. He stomped his feet heavily and said with a deep voice, "Apart from Lu Chilua, who else knows where the imperial family court is? Get someone here, bring me there and show me the way." Lu Qingfeng jumped to his feet, shook his head and said, "You can't do that, you can't do that. This place can't be compared with Little Meng City. There are countless formidable warriors in Ji City, and there are more than 100,000 soldiers patrolling at night. Rumor has it that there are real cultivators patrolling at night in the inner city. You can't go out there." Wu Qi stomped his feet again, then with a deep voice, he cried out, "So, where did they go? No matter what the result is, they should at least give me a reply, right?" While both men were having a discussion, Zhang Hu suddenly came into the courtyard in a hurry. He bowed at Lu Chengfeng and said hastily, "Young master, brother Wu Qi, a few servants from the imperial family court have brought Madam's seal here. They want to invite young master to the imperial family court in secret for a discussion." Lu Chengfeng was overjoyed. He quickly pulled Wu Qi and walked out of the courtyard. Wu Qi hastily turned his head and greeted them. Luo Kadi and Mao Yang exchanged a glance, then quickly followed behind them. Outside the main hall of the first courtyard of the mansion, a few men clad in black cloaks with their faces covered were standing quietly under the eaves. Upon hearing the footsteps of Wu Qi and his men, the few men quickly turned around and handed over a thumb-sized, dark red jade seal to Wu Qi. "Are you young Master Qingfeng? Following the order from my master, we're here to invite young master to the mansion for a secret discussion." Together with the seal, there was also a token made from gold, silver, copper, iron, and tin. The palm-sized token was fully engraved with patterns of wind and clouds. Amidst the wind and clouds, a green bird was seen flying high up in the sky. On the back of the token, a small character Ji was engraved in the middle of a bright sun. Lu Chengfeng took over the seal and gave it a quick examination. It was indeed the personal seal of Tai Yuo. Meanwhile, Wu Qi took over the token. Although it did not look big, it was very heavy. He gave it a thorough examination, and sure enough, the words Great Yan Dynasty's Imperial Grandmaster, Yu Xian, were engraved on the edge of the token. Weighing the token in his hand, Wu Qi asked, "Why didn't one of the personal guards of the madam come with you?" The man answered with an indifferent tone, "Do you think anyone can walk freely in Ji City during the night? One more person, one more trouble." He sneered, then continued with an arrogant tone, "Even for you, when we enter the inner city later, you will have to hide in the coach. Don't make any noise and don't move. If you cause any trouble, don't blame us for not doing anything. Young Master Chengfeng, don't forget your current identity, you're still the eldest young master of Liang Lu clan." Lu Chengfeng snorted lightly, then he turned to look at Wu Qi. Wu Qi narrowed his eyes and said with a low voice, "Our young master will need to bring a few personal guards with him." The man in black gave Wu Qi and the others a glance, then said with an indifferent tone, "Apart from young Master Chengfeng, it would be best if there are no more than 4 personal guards. The coach we brought here is too small, and we can't fit too many people." Wu Qi pointed at himself, Luo Kadi, and Mao Yang, then said with an indifferent tone, "Just the 3 of us will serve our young master." The few men in black nodded their heads at Chi-Chi. Without saying anything more, they pulled the cloaks that covered their faces, spun, and walked out of the mansion. In the shadow outside the mansion, a small double-wheeled coach painted with black paint was waiting for them. Wu Qi and company boarded the coach. A few men in black surrounded the coach, and the wheels rattled as they drove toward the inner city. Along the way, there were patrols of soldiers passing by, but when they saw a light green lantern hanging on the shaft of the coach, they pretended they didn't see the coach and let them pass. The few men in black did have a great authority, as all the city gates of Ji City had been locked at this moment. Without alerting anyone, they opened 2 small side doors on the city wall and went straight into the inner city. The streets in the inner city of Ji City were still the same as they were 2,000 years ago. The widest street was no more than 30 feet. Both sides of the street were occupied by the princes and nobles of Great Yan Dynasty. The walls were over 100 feet tall, which made the street look even narrower. The few men in black drove the coach to take a detour and finally turned into a remote alley. The coach stopped abruptly. Wu Qi, who had been observing the surroundings through a slit in the window, was startled. It was completely dark here, and there wasn't even a door. How could this be the imperial family court? Hastily, he asked in a low voice, "My friends, where is this place?" The few men in black laughed at Chi-Chi, then suddenly spun and leaped into the darkness. Wu Qi was startled. He let out a loud cry and kicked the door of the coach. A muffled sound rang out, and the door shattered into countless debris. Wu Qi sprung out from the coach. Amidst the darkness, several dozens of strong gusts approached soundlessly. In just a blink of an eye, they had arrived next to Wu Qi and enveloped his entire body. More strong gusts came assaulting the coach. The harsh cold air made Lu Qingfeng and the other two men in the coach break out in cold sweat. Chapter 64. The Inner City of Ji City. On the east side of the imperial palace of Great Yan Dynasty, there was a courtyard that occupied an area of over 1,500 acres. The garden behind the courtyard had a small hill and flowing water, a dense forest, and a garden with palaces and pavilions. It looked luxurious and luxurious. However, the three-layered courtyard in front of the courtyard was simple and unadorned. All the houses were constructed with huge trees and rocks, and there were no decorations on the exterior of the houses. Patches of moss could be seen everywhere in this three-layered courtyard, which made the houses look very old and ancient, and gave them a gloomy and ancient feeling. Tai Yuewu was sitting in a hall in the front courtyard, tasting a bowl of tea that looked no different from boiled water. The quality of the tea was very poor. It was coarse, dry, and came with a strong bitter taste. If not for Lu Qiuluo leading the way, Tai Yuewu would never believe that this was the mansion of Great Yan Dynasty's imperial grandmaster, Duke Yanxing Yuxian. She would have thought that this was the residence of some peddler. The hall was about 100 feet wide, and it was spacious and tall. However, there were not many furnishings in the hall. Apart from a piece of worn-out red carpet on the floor, bronze candlesticks placed at the four corners of the hall, and a few broken tables with their paint peeling off, there was nothing else in the hall. The floor of the hall was uneven. When Tai Yuewu entered the hall, she saw two mushrooms growing on top of the rotten threshold. Although there were 4 large bronze candlesticks in the hall, each of them was lit with only 3 white candlesticks the size of a little finger. The hall was so spacious, yet there were only so many candles and the light was really dim. Tai Yuewu stretched out her hand, but she could barely see her own fingers. Coupled with the patches of moss in the courtyard, the broken furnishings, and the 2 mushrooms growing on the threshold, how could this still be the mansion of a Duke of Great Yan Dynasty? Obviously, it was a haunted mansion that had not been inhabited by anyone for several hundred years, and had been haunted by ghosts for over 100 years. A few serving ladies were standing in the hall, looking weak and feeble, skinny like a reed, with potholes all over their bodies, and staring blankly like zombies. It made the hall look no different from a haunted mansion. The clothes worn by these few serving ladies were made from coarse linen. Not only were they not washed properly, there were many patches on their sleeves. While frowning, Tai Yuewu gave these few serving girls a few more glances, twitched her mouth, picked up the teacup, and poured a few mouthfuls of bitter tea into her mouth. How did Yuxian Mansion manage to find these few maidservants? This world's world spirit qi was extremely abundant, and there were a lot of beautiful girls in this world. On the contrary, it was very difficult to find a few ugly girls. Yuxian's butler must have put in a lot of effort to find these maids who looked like moldy potatoes. Tai Yuewu sighed inwardly and shook her head lightly. As soon as she entered the city, she immediately took a bath and changed her clothes before rushing to Yuxian Mansion. This kind of behavior was not in accordance with etiquette, but in a hurry she couldn't care less. She successfully entered Yuxian's mansion and was brought to this hall by the butler to wait for Yuxian's audience. However, from dusk until the moon hung high in the sky, Yuxian did not show up. Not even a single person of status came out to give her an explanation. In her sleeve, Tai Yuewu clenched her fists tightly. In the Lu Kingdom, who dared to neglect her like this? However, this was the Great Yan Dynasty, the suzerain of over 100 vassal kingdoms under the heaven. Furthermore, Yuxian was the man who held the power in the imperial family court of Great Yan Dynasty, and he had the important power to supervise all the kingdoms under the heaven. Putting aside the fact that Tai Yuowu was left hanging here, even if he did something more outrageous, she could only endure it obediently. Tai Yuowu breathed out a silent sigh, picked up the teacup, and gulped down all the tea in it. A serving lady with an ugly appearance, with a thumb-sized black sarcoma growing on her chin, came up to Tai Yuowu with a silly smile on her face. She grabbed the teapot and poured Tai Yuowu a cup of tea that had turned white. The action of this serving lady was crude and reckless, causing the tea to splash out from the teapot and stain Tai Yuowu's skirt. Tai Yuowu resisted the urge to slap this serving lady to death, gave her a charming smile, nodded her head lightly at the serving lady and said, "Thank you for your hard work, young lady." The serving lady giggled a few times at Tai Yuowu, then picked up the teapot and walked back to her original spot. She stood there with a blank expression like a wooden statue. Tai Yuowu lowered her head and rolled her eyes without anyone noticing. Looking at the water stain that was slowly spreading on her exquisite and expensive palace dress, all the muscles in her body tightened. Her fingers were clenched tightly into fists under her sleeves, and with great effort, she managed to restrain the evil intention in her heart. The front courtyard of the imperial family court was old and dilapidated, looking like a haunted house, but the back courtyard was a luxurious garden. Behind an abode constructed with golden cassia wood, there was a large pool that was excavated in the open air. The bottom of the pool was carved out using mutton fat jade, and the surface of the pool was densely inlaid with several thousands of gemstones of various colors. A tall and skinny old man was seen sprinting on top of a fair and delicate body with all his strength. The sweet moaning of the old man drifted far away with the wind, making one's heart itch. An old man with a fair face and no facial hair, tender skin, and a face that looked like a peeled egg, was standing at the edge of the pool with a big smile on his face, staring at the skinny old man without blinking. After a full half an hour, the skinny old man finally let out a long sigh of satisfaction. His body trembled a few times, then he slowly straightened his back from the soft and delicate body. The old man rubbed the fair and delicate body with all his strength. Although skinny, he had a beautiful face that looked like an immortal. He asked with an indifferent tone, "Is that girl from Lu family still here?" The old man smiled and said, "Yes, she is. I've asked someone to inspect the 3 coaches she brought here just now. There are no common things like gold or silver in them, but only pearls, hawksbill turtles, energy stones, beast cores, and some other good stuff. Although the number is not much, I think its value should be at least 3 million gold coins." The skinny old man, the imperial grandmaster of Great Yan Dynasty, Duke Yan Xingong, Yu Xian, had his eyes lit up and said, "Oh? 3 million gold coins? This is just a small clan in the Lu Kingdom, but they do have some wealth." Yu Xian let out a long sigh and patted the body of the girl he was sitting on. He stood up, frowned and said, I've miscalculated. I thought that a small clan in the Lu Kingdom, who only brought 3 coaches worth of stuff, could not be worth much. That's why I left her there. I didn't expect that there were actually 3 million gold coins. This is a heavy gift. She brought such a heavy gift to me, yet she neglected it. If this news gets out, my reputation will be ruined. The old man laughed dryly and explained in a low voice, I can't blame you, my lord. It's my fault for not doing my job well. The things in those 3 coaches are not ready-made gold or silver. As for how much those treasures are worth, I can't tell for sure, can I? That's why I asked 2 old shopkeepers who are knowledgeable in treasures to help me appraise them. It took me a long time to finish appraising the value of all the treasures in those 3 coaches. Yu Xian sighed, shook his head and said, No, it's still not right. I've miscalculated today, I've miscalculated. If this news gets out, my reputation will be ruined. Hurry up and help me change my clothes. I need to get this done as soon as possible. More than a dozen naked and charming young girls quickly walked out and helped Yu Xian quickly change his clothes. Blinking his eyes for a few times, Yu Xian pulled the few strands of beard on his chin, frowned and pondered for a while, then strode to a big tree next to the abode. He picked up a pebble the size of a toddler's head from under the tree, then fiercely smashed it on his own face. A miserable howl rang out, as Yu Xian had smashed his nose, causing 2 streams of blood to spray out. Yu Xian sighed lightly, then signaled the serving ladies to quickly stop the nosebleed. After that, he carefully applied some makeup on his face. Looking at the puddle of blood on the ground, Yu Xian breathed out a long sigh and said, "Is it easy to earn some money in these days? I'm a duke, the imperial grandmaster of Great Yen Dynasty. For the sake of 3 million gold coins, for the sake of my reputation, I have no choice but to do this." Shaking his head, Yu Xian asked the old man in red robes, "How much did you sell the information about Lu Chengfeng for?" The old man hurriedly took a few steps forward, smiled and said, "The information about Lu Chengfeng was sold for 10,000 gold coins, and the imperial family court token you made privately was sold for 50,000 gold coins. Don't worry, I've done everything well. The 60,000 gold coins have already been deposited into the inner treasury." Yu Xian nodded his head satisfyingly, pulled his burlap clothes, breathed out a long sigh and said, "That's good, that's good. Isn't it just to earn some money? Do you think it's easy for me?" Just when Tai Yuewu was about to lose her patience from waiting and was thinking about how she could take revenge on Yu Xian, she heard a light cough coming from behind the screen in the hall. Yu Xian, who had a bloody nose and a swollen face, and there were even streaks of blood under his nose, walked out in a sorry state with the help of 2 ugly maidservants. Before Tai Yuewu could stand up and greet him, Yu Xian hastily came up to her, cupped his fist and apologized, I'm ashamed. Today, when I entered the palace to discuss some business, I accidentally fell from my mount and hurt my face. I've just woken up. Thank you for waiting for me for so long, I'm really ashamed." Looking at Yu Xian's sunken nose, Tai Yuewu was shocked. She quickly rose to her feet with a smile on her face and said, "You're being too polite, old master. Rong Yang has been waiting for a long time, and the reason why Rong Yang paid me a visit is because of my son, Qingfeng. In those years, Rong Yang and Lord Zhuguizheng." When she said this, Tai Yuewu's face blushed, as if she wanted to say something but stopped. Before Tai Yuewu could finish her words, Yu Xian said impatiently, I understand. Tomorrow I'll do it for you. Chengfeng is the blood descendant of Great Yen Dynasty, and he is my grandnephew. We are not strangers. After a few laughs, Yu Xian let out a long laugh and said, Buji doesn't have any legitimate son, but he has left many descendants outside. We all know about that. Whichever son of Buji arrives in Ji City first will inherit his title of nobility and fief. This is also the decision made by the imperial family court. The sanctimonious Yu Xian's lustful eyes quickly ran over Tai Yuewu's voluptuous breasts. In a righteous manner, he said, as long as it is verified that young Master Qingfeng is the blood descendant of Buji, he will be the Zhuguizheng of Great Yen Dynasty. All these are my responsibilities, and yet, you still brought me 3 carts of gifts. You are treating me like an outsider. Before Tai Yuewu could say anything, Yu Xian laughed out loud and said, Don't do this again. I've always been an honest and upright man, and I won't take any of these ill-gotten gains. However, since Qingfeng is my grandnephew, I'll make an exception and accept these 3 carts of local products. Little wooer, please keep the gifts brought by Madam into the storeroom. No matter what, they are Madam's sincerity. The old man answered hastily, then ordered his servants to drive the 3 carts into the inner courtyard. Yu Xian stared at Tai Yuewu with a smile on his face, who had a strange expression on her face. With a complacent expression, he said, If not because of Qingfeng, I would never accept the gifts brought by Madam. Madam, please take a look at this shabby courtyard of mine, and my clothes are so simple and crude. Normally, this duke doesn't take even a single cent of ill-gotten gains. A strong wind blew across, causing the lamps in the hall to sway and extinguish. Yu Xian's coarse linen robe was blown up by the strong wind, revealing the luxurious underwear he was wearing, which was made from 1,000-year-old ice silk, and a few buttons made from top-grade gemstones on his underwear. The quiet night of Ji City was suddenly broken by a loud noise. Chapter 65. Concentrating his innate water energy into his eyes, Wu Qi could clearly see what was coming at him from the darkness. It was a few dozens of triangular wind-breaking awls, each as thick as a finger and over a foot long. They were jet black and had an anti-reflective surface. These oddly shaped wind-breaking awls were exquisitely designed, and the craftsmanship was extremely high. They were shot out with a powerful mechanism at an extremely fast speed and did not make any sound while flying. If not for the fact that he had already entered the Xiantian realm and gained a preliminary divine sense, Wu Qi would not have been able to sense these things approaching him. He let out a breath and released his innate water energy from his body. A layer of flexible and dense gang energy covered his entire body. After that, Wu Qi thrust out 2 palms and greeted the few wind-breaking awls that were less than 10 feet away from him. Activating the hand of Web, an invisible whirlpool of air swept out, and a strange whistling sound of wind immediately rang out in the air. The sound of ripping cloth was heard. The 2 whirlpools that Wu Qi thrust out were easily pierced through by the wind-breaking awls, and the 10 feet protective gang energy that he had released outside his body was also easily broken by the wind-breaking awls. Not only that, the wind-breaking awls went against Wu Qi's gang energy, increasing its speed by 30% and shooting down like a bolt of lightning. These things could break gang energy. A blue light swirled in Wu Qi's eyes, and he suddenly saw the tiny talisman engraved on the surface of the wind-breaking awls. They were called wind-breaking talismans. These talismans were originally used on magical treasures like flying swords, specifically used to break the natural gang energy at high altitudes and increase the flying speed of flying swords. Surprisingly, they also had a miraculous effect when used on a warrior's gang energy. He also saw a faintly discernible black light at the tip of these wind-breaking awls. The sharpest tip of these wind-breaking awls was actually forged with a rare material called nether wind iron. This kind of millennium dark iron was a unique metal that could only be produced after absorbing the nether energy from underground for 100 years. It was also specialized in breaking gang energy of warriors. Wu Qi let out a strange cry. He did not dare to fight head-on. Holding his head with both hands, his body shrunk abruptly, turning into a meatball less than 2 feet in size. Then he rolled and rolled on the ground, leaving a gust of wind behind him. Followed by a series of sizzling noises, tens of wind-breaking awls stuck close to Wu Qi's body and pierced into the ground, leaving tens of bottomless holes on the ground. After a series of messy flips, Wu Qi rushed to the side of the carriage where Lu Qingfeng and the other 2 were. He kicked the carriage towards the entrance of the alleyway. An enormous amount of Zhen Qi burst out, pushing the heavy carriage back for over 100 feet. Nearly 100 wind-breaking awls rained down in a messy manner, creating a large area of densely packed small holes on the ground. A loud boom rang out, and the carriage exploded. Lu Qingfeng, Luo Kedi, and Ma Liang dashed out from the shattered carriage. As experienced as Luo Kedi and Ma Liang were, when they dashed out from the carriage, they immediately stuck close to the walls on both sides. On the other hand, Lu Qingfeng leaped into the air in an awe-inspiring manner. With a trembling voice, he cried out, "Who is the thief that dares to stab me in the back? Aren't you afraid of the law of Great Yan Dynasty?" Looking at Lu Qingfeng, who was so awe-inspiring, Wu Qi was so frightened that cold sweat broke out from his body. He let out a strange cry, and his body that had shrunk into a meatball suddenly sprung up. Compared to Lu Qingfeng, his speed was 2 times faster. He grabbed onto Lu Qingfeng's ankle and forcefully threw him down to the ground. Lu Qingfeng cried out in fear as he was thrown down to the ground by Wu Qi. Helplessly, Wu Qi was sent flying up another 10 feet into the air along with the rebounding force. Suddenly, a light shout was heard coming from the top of the pitch-black wall. "Attack!" A muffled boom rang out, as if a small steel cannon was firing right next to Wu Qi's ears. 3 heavy crossbows, each as thick as a toddler's arm and measuring 13 feet long, were thrusting towards Wu Qi's chest with an ear-splitting whistle. These heavy crossbows were entirely forged with tungsten steel, and they were extremely heavy. It was unknown what kind of insane crossbow mechanism was used to shoot them out. Furthermore, the speed of these crossbows was 2 times faster than the wind-breaking awls. "Get out of the way!" Lu Qingfeng let out a wild cry. Right when he stood up from the ground, he immediately saw 3 heavy crossbow bolts shooting towards Wu Qi. He couldn't help but be scared out of his wits. As Wu Qi was hovering in midair, he couldn't exert any force, and there was no room for him to dodge. Abruptly, a cold blue gleam flashed across his eyes, as both of his hands quickly drew circles in front of his face. Innate water energy surged out from his body, transforming into dozens of rapidly spinning invisible whirlpools in front of him. The air was spinning at an incredible speed, producing an ear-splitting whistling noise. The friction between the air and the air brought up a faint white air explosion. In the blink of an eye, the 3 crossbow bolts had arrived less than 3 feet in front of Wu Qi. A loud boom rang out, as the 3 heavy crossbow bolts made from tungsten steel suddenly twisted into a twisted dough twist, then were rolled and spun by the invisible whirlpools in the air. The twisted crossbow bolts brushed past Wu Qi's body and flew for nearly half a mile away. Wu Qi felt a tremendous force coming right at his face, as if both of his hands had been brutally smashed by a heavy hammer. His innate water energy trembled violently, causing the innate energy inside his body to be thrown into disorder. A mouthful of blood sprayed out from Wu Qi's mouth, and with the momentum of the heavy crossbow bolts, he was sent flying backward for over 200 feet. Letting out a raging roar, Wu Qi's bravery burst out, and he suddenly let out a loud laugh. While laughing hysterically, he took out 2 9-cloud-piercing crossbows from the storage bag tied around his waist. Along with a series of cracking noises, 18 pure steel crossbow bolts were shot towards the direction where the heavy crossbow bolts came from. The crossbow bolts disappeared into the darkness, and suddenly a shrill howl came from over 1,000 feet away. The sound of the crossbow bolts piercing through human flesh and bones was ear-piercing, followed by a muffled thud. Someone must have fallen from the top of the wall and fallen to the ground. Casually, he shoved 2 cloud-piercing crossbows into his storage bag, and with a wave of his hand, another 2 crossbows appeared out of nowhere. Another 18 pure steel crossbow bolts were shot out, followed by another 18 bolts and another 18 bolts. Borrowing the force of the heavy crossbow bolts, Wu Qi was sent flying backward for over 100 feet. He had actually fired 12 waves of 24 9-cloud-piercing crossbows in a row. Over 200 crossbow bolts were shot out one after another, and from time to time, miserable cries and curses mixed with anger could be heard coming from the darkness. Lu Chengfeng let out a loud laugh and shouted, "Well done! Ha!" These 9-cloud-piercing crossbows were seized from the Crocada's cavalry during the battle in Little Meng City. As Wu Qi saw the incredible power of these crossbows, he kept 100 of them in his storage bag with the principle of better safe than sorry. Just in time, they would come in handy tonight. The man who shot 3 bolts at Wu Qi in the darkness did not expect Wu Qi to have a storage bag, and he never expected someone would be so bored as to store so many 9-cloud-piercing crossbows in his storage bag. They were caught unprepared by Wu Qi, and more than half of them were killed or wounded on the spot. A gloomy sneer was heard coming from afar. "Hee, you do have some abilities, but you still have to die." Wu Qi's innate energy dissipated, and he staggered and fell to the ground. Lu Chengfeng and the other 2 men quickly came over and met up with Wu Qi. Wu Qi stretched out his hand and grabbed a few 9-cloud-piercing crossbows from his storage bag, handing them over to them. In the dark, it was much more convenient to use crossbows. Once there was any movement, they just needed to shoot with the crossbow bolts. With Lu Chengfeng in the middle, Wu Qi taking the lead, and Luo Kadi and Ma Yang standing on the left and right, the 4 of them were running toward the exit of the alley at their fastest speed. All 4 of them had the cultivation base of Xiantian realm. As they unleashed their innate energy, they could cover a distance of 100 feet with every leap, and they were about to rush out of the alley. However, when the sneer came out, all 4 of them felt the ground beneath their feet suddenly tremble. Not only were the walls of G City tall and sturdy, the walls on both sides of the streets in the city also had some tricks up their sleeves. For example, in the alley where Wu Qi and his companions were standing, the towering walls on both sides were built with huge rocks, and underneath the foundation of the walls were some kind of mechanism. Once the mechanism was activated, the walls would immediately tilt and collapse toward the middle of the street. If the enemies were to invade the city, no matter how many enemies there were, as long as they were walking on the street, once the mechanism was activated, the huge rocks would collapse, and even an Iron Man would be flattened by the huge rocks. It was unknown what background the culprit behind the attack on Wu Qi and his companions had, but he had actually activated the trump card of Great Yan Dynasty, which was supposed to be the last line of defense for the city. All four of them felt the ground beneath their feet turn soft, and their speed of flying forward slowed down abruptly. Suddenly, the towering walls on both sides of the 3-mile-long alley tilted inwardly, and the huge rocks several feet in circumference collapsed with a loud rumble. The rocks collided with each other and produced a large amount of sparks. The loud noise broke the tranquility of Ji City. The noise was exactly what Yu Xian and Tai Yuewu heard from the imperial family court. The width of the alley was less than 10 feet, and the walls on both sides were about 70 to 80 feet tall. When the walls tilted inwardly, the top of their heads was immediately sealed off. When the walls disintegrated, huge rocks several feet in circumference came crashing down in a messy manner. The alley had become a dead zone, and there was no place for them to dodge. Luo Kadi and Ma Yang stared at the huge rocks that came crashing down from above. They threw away the bows in their hands, and at the same time, thrust both their fists into the sky with all their strength. Wu Qi let out a long and sonorous cry as well. Together, both of them thrust their palms into the sky with all their strength. The several dozens of huge rocks that came crashing down from above suddenly trembled, and the speed of their falling slowed down. With this brief moment of delay, Lu Chengfeng had already taken out 3 array pillars of the Earth Spirit Armor formation. He did not have the time to form an incantation gesture and recite an incantation. Instead, he bit the tip of his tongue and sprayed out a mouthful of blood onto the array pillars, using the fastest and most damaging method to activate the formation. The situation was critical. When Lu Chengfeng bit his tongue, he did not control his strength. His 2 rows of teeth clenched together, and when he sprayed out blood, he even spat out a bean-sized piece of flesh from his tongue. Blood gushed out like a fountain from Lu Chengfeng's tongue, and he was in so much pain that tears gushed out from his eyes. The 3 array pillars shook, and the ground around them shook. A large amount of dirt-yellow airflow came rushing over, quickly forming a dirt-yellow energy shield around the 4 of them. Very quickly, Lu Chengfeng threw out the array pillars, which sank deep into the ground and surrounded the 4 of them in a triangular formation. As the huge rocks fell down, the dirt-yellow energy shield trembled, and the rocks that came into contact with the shield suddenly broke into pieces, gradually turning into thumb-sized pebbles. Blood gushed out from Lu Chengfeng's mouth, flowing down his chin and dripping onto the clothes on his chest. He pointed his finger at the sky and cursed loudly, "Little brats, what kind of hatred do I, Lu Chengfeng, have against you? Why do you have to stab me in the back like this?" About 100 feet away, the voice that let out a cold laugh just now suddenly rang out, "What? You're not dead yet?" The voice was filled with astonishment and doubt, and Wu Qi quickly located the man's position through his voice. Exerting all his strength, Wu Qi pushed away the 2 huge rocks above his head, then with a 9-cloud piercing crossbow in his left hand, he sprung up into the air. 9 bolts were shot towards the direction of the man. Wu Qi put away the crossbow and cried out with a stern voice, "Luo Kadi, follow me and kill them." Clutching the 2 poisonous thorns he got from Meng Mountains tightly in his hands, Wu Qi leaped forward and covered a distance of over 100 feet, rushing towards the direction of the man. Luo Kadi, who was infuriated by the ambush, pulled out his long sword, cursed, and charged towards the man. You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.